Chapter 121, Professor, if you don't improve, how can I? When Char saw bronze-level transfiguration appear on the system panel, something clicked in his head. He had assumed transfiguration wouldn't be recognized by the system the way Lumos or the pruning charm were. Now he realized it hadn't been that the system ignored transfiguration. It was that his skill had been too low. It hadn't even reached bronze level before, so it had never shown up. He couldn't help a sigh. Bronze-level transfiguration was already difficult. No wonder so many wizards joked that transfiguration classes were from entry to burial. This would probably be the hardest ability he had tackled so far. He wondered how long it would take to reach the next rank. Shadow Thorns would likely still be a long way off. Class had ended, but the other students hadn't dispersed. They were clustered around him, eyes wide and eager. Char, the transfiguration you just did was amazing. I can't even turn a match into a silver needle. Is there some trick to it? Can you teach us? Char gave an embarrassed smile. There was no trick, really, just talent and practice. Still, faced with so many eager faces, he hesitated, then decided to have a little fun. A trick? He said, adopting a conspiratorial tone. Of course there is. The students leaned in. You have to believe in yourself, he said quietly. If you truly believe you can learn transfiguration, you'll learn it. Aren't you always doubting yourselves? Go back and silently repeat, I can learn 500 times, then try again. Maybe it'll be different. The students lit up at his secret technique. Really? I'll go try it now. Char watched them go with a shake of his head. If telling them to stop doubting pushed them past the fear of difficulty, perhaps some of them would indeed improve. An owl flapped up at that moment and dropped a letter at his feet. The ministry seal made his heart lift. Perhaps his compensation had arrived. He opened it and found a note from Fudge himself. Fudge, who had the reputation of a career politician who never kept promises, had in fact kept this one. On the first day of school, the ministry had sent 100 bottles of potion for cultivating Devil's Snare to Hogwarts, now stored in the potions classroom. Fudge's letter was almost effusive. Use them freely, and if they ran out, there would be more. His administration cared about nurturing talent. Char smiled genuinely. Minister Fudge, I misjudged you, he said to the empty room. You're a good man. He hurried toward the potions classroom. The trio, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, emerged from the transfiguration classroom behind him, still stunned by his performance. Hermione's face was tight with shock and urgency. I can't believe Char's transfiguration improved so much, she said. He must have been cramming over Christmas. And I've been hunting for Nicholas Flamel all this time. What a fool I've been. I'm so far behind now. I need to catch up. Ron was sour and jealous. He had always wanted the sort of attention Char now enjoyed. He remembered the mirror of Erised that Christmas. The scene he had seen was much like this. Him the center of admiration. The mirror's image had been only a fantasy. Char's success was real. How could his transfiguration go from being the same as ours to this after one holiday? Ron grumbled. It's not normal. I bet Snape helped him. Snape used potions to help Slytherin during the Lumos final. He could have done the same for Char. No wonder Char is such a Snape toady. Look, he's heading for the potions classroom. He must be meeting Snape again. I don't want to know what he had to do to get Snape's help. Hermione bristled. Ron, she snapped. Don't keep making accusations about Char. Ron snorted. And you stop defending Snape's lackey. Harry cut in before it escalated. Don't argue. I have an idea. He glanced at them both. I have the invisibility cloak. Let's get back to the common room, fetch it, and then sneak to the potions classroom. Maybe we can overhear what Char and Snape are up to. And who knows, maybe we'll hear something about Nicholas Flamel. Ron's face brightened at the prospect of exposing Char. Hermione hesitated, but thinking of Hogwarts' safety, she agreed. They set off to fetch the cloak. Char, unaware of their plan, had already reached the potions classroom. Inside, on a table, sat an exquisitely made small briefcase. Snape was there too. As Char crossed the threshold, Snape dismissed him with a single, clipped, "Come in." Char entered, and Snape immediately cast a Muffliato charm and several protective spells. Then he raised an eyebrow and jabbed his wand toward the briefcase. That box of rubbish. Did the ministry send that compensation? His voice was full of contempt. These potions, he said, don't deserve the name. They're the pretensions of mediocrities, a waste of materials. Do you think I can't brew such low-level draughts? Char blinked, then quickly tried to be deferential. Of course not, Professor. Who in the magical world brews better potions than you? I just didn't want to bother you. Your time is too precious. You should be pushing potion research forward. Between teaching and everything else, I didn't want to waste your time. And with this many bottles, I couldn't even cover the cost of materials, let alone your labor. Snape snorted, half satisfied. He picked up the briefcase, slid out 10 bottles, and handed them to Char without looking. Only these 10 are worth anything, masterfully made. Use them with confidence. The rest I'll have to reprocess. If you use them on Devil's Snare as is, the plants will starve. Char studied the bottles. They were sealed, in anti-magic containers to prevent leakage. He looked puzzled. Professor, how do you know those 10 are the good ones when they're still sealed? Snape gave him a faint look. Would you fail to recognize a potion you brewed yourself? Char's mouth opened. He glanced at the label. L.E. Potion Shop, it read. L.E. Lily Evans? The realization hit him. Is this your potion shop? Snape rolled his eyes. Don't be completely dense. He spoke a little more animatedly than usual. Potion research isn't cheap. Dumbledore is stingy. How far can that funding stretch? I brew tooth-healing potion for him for free. I've covered more material costs than I care to count. If I don't run a shop, where would the money for research come from? Char thought of his past life and present life. Some things were the same, though his own position felt different now. He brightened. Then, Professor, once this batch is used up, I'll request your L.E. Potion Shop's potions from the Ministry. Snape's expression tightened. He was about to object. This was not a thing he wanted a student involved in, but Char continued, and his next words made Snape stop and think. If you earn less money, your potion research will slow, Char said. If you don't improve, Professor, how can I improve? Everything I do is for progress. Professor, I want to improve. The hard line in Snape's brow loosened. The idea made sense. If Char could legitimately obtain large quantities, Snape could earn money for research. Snape found himself looking at the boy in a new way. Not entirely foolish, not merely a sycophant, sensible in his own awkward way. Snape's mood lightened. He seemed to remember something and asked, I saw the House Cup points. Professor McGonagall said you gave a perfect transfiguration performance and that your understanding far exceeded your peers. Char nodded without hesitation. Snape's surprise deepened. He clearly hadn't expected such a development. After a moment's thought, Snape made a decision. He took one of the otherwise dismissed bottles from the briefcase and leveled his wand. Since you've entered the realm of transfiguration, Snape said, a rare hint of self-satisfaction touching his voice, and your potion work is, if barely, presentable, watch closely. He put a small, private smile on his face. This technique I've never published, nor taught publicly. I call it Severus Potion Transfiguration. Chapter 122, Potion Transfiguration, Deathly Hallows, Gold Tier Shadow Thorns. Snape's words made Charles freeze for a moment. Snape's original techniques? Incarcerus, Sectum Sempra. Those were the spells in the Half-Blood Prince's book. But then Charles realized those were only a fraction of what Snape had once known. Those charms and potion-handling tricks had come from Snape's student days. So many years had passed. How could Snape still be stuck with only those? He must have developed techniques far more profound than anything in that old textbook. Severus Potion Transfiguration. Charles chewed on the name. Snape had used his own name for it. That said everything about the man's pride. Potion Transfiguration. Charles had never heard the term before. Snape seemed to read him. Of course you haven't, he said, because it's a hybrid discipline I've been researching for years. He began to explain. The essence of potion making is the collision and fusion of magic between materials until a harmonious state emerges. But current potions face a dire problem, Snape continued. After years of upheaval, many materials have become extinct in the magical world. Countless ancient formulas are impossible to recreate because their ingredients are gone. If a matchstick can be turned into a silver needle, why can't an extinct potion ingredient be replaced by transforming other materials with transfiguration? If you know the magical properties of a substitute, the reaction you want to produce, and the final state you seek, there's a path to follow. Potion transfiguration was born. Snape's eyes shone. If this skill is perfected, he said, no special potion materials would be necessary. Give me enough ordinary magical herbs and time, and I can remake every potion from the past to the present. He clenched his hand, jaw tight. Even the legendary potion that raises the dead. It's nothing. Hearing that, Charles inhaled sharply. His scalp tingled. He suddenly saw the deepest reasons Snape had developed potion transfiguration. Snape wanted to recreate the lost resurrection potion. He hadn't given up on bringing Lily back. After years of study, he'd made real progress. If war hadn't broken out in canon, if he hadn't died by Lord Voldemort's hand, perhaps Snape would have perfected this art and rewritten potioncraft, or even magical history. Snape tightened his grip on his wand. Watch carefully. Charles focused completely, watching every motion. A talented potion master who had spent over a decade on this art deserved no distractions. Snape dipped his wand into a bottle of crudely made Devil's Snare potion and let the tip touch the liquid's surface. It was such a small motion, but to Charles, it was like striking a match to dry gunpowder. The potion erupted. The magic inside flared violently, an explosion of complex reactions hidden beneath that placid surface. Snape's wand barely touched the potion as the chaos smoothed out, step by step. By the time the liquid calmed, the bottle that had once held a poor-quality brew now emitted a harmonious aura. It could almost be called a masterpiece. Charles, who already had some potion knowledge, stared in disbelief. Snape, satisfied, wiped the sweat from his brow. "Do you understand?" Charles forced a wry smile and shook his head. Understand? He wasn't sure whether Snape was genuinely asking or mocking him. The web of reactions he'd just seen was orders of magnitude more complex than anything he had made. On top of that, Snape had been transfiguring the magic itself. Charles couldn't begin to follow it. Snape's lips curved. "I can show you once a month from now on." He lowered his voice. "Try to learn. I don't have many years left to teach." Charles' excitement at witnessing the skill curdled into a sharp sadness. In canon, Snape was a tragic figure, a double agent whose life ended in Nagini's venom. He died never seeing Lily again, and Severus' potion transfiguration never reached the world. Charles had been at odds with Snape. There had even been that incident with points deducted, but he felt an unexpected debt. If he could, he didn't want Snape to die like that. "Professor," Charles said after a moment's thought, "if you ever run into trouble or danger, I will help you, no matter who I have to face." Snape raised an eyebrow, almost smiling. The boy didn't know the forces he might be pitting himself against. If the Dark Lord returned, as Dumbledore expected, Snape had likely already foreseen that he wouldn't survive. Yet seeing Charles' earnestness warmed him slightly. He hid it with a cold snort. "Is that so? I didn't know Mr. Sprout had such confidence. Then let's see if you practiced over the Christmas holiday, or if you were just busy being a star in the papers. Take out your wand." Charles was used to Snape's barbs. At the word duel, his eyes lit. He tightened his grip on his wand and stepped back. "Be careful," Snape warned. "After the break, you accidentally knocked out 2 ministry employees. Do you really think yourself powerful? I should bring you back to reality." Snape's fingers curled, and as always, his mouth kept talking while his subtle magic reached out. Charles had been thrown into the air by Snape many times before with a wordless Incarcerus. This time, he was ready. He surrendered himself to the magic and moved before Snape's conjuration fully formed. Snape's silent Incarcerus missed, and Charles answered with, "Levicorpus." Snape's body lurched. He failed to hide his surprise. One Christmas holiday, a few weeks. Could the boy already handle practical combat? Was Charles a late-blooming talent despite poor innate magic? Charles pressed the advantage with a flurry of Incarcerus, Lumos, and Levitation Charm, trying to overwhelm Snape with both honest spells and cheap tricks. But Snape, a veteran of actual battlefields, simply chuckled and unraveled the attacks easily. Then he launched a series of subtle Incarcerus spells. Charles dodged by feeling the flow of magic, but a split second later, he was disoriented. "I felt it from this direction." A feint, a magical decoy. Snape had tricked Charles into reacting to a fake before striking with the real spell. The room spun. Charles was dumped to the floor. There was no frustration on his face, only exhilaration. "Learned. Again," he called. "Professor, again." Snape watched the boy like someone watching a sponge soak up water. His muttered thought almost sounded like amusement. He could abuse Charles with the same feint, and the boy would come back for more. Late into the night, Snape kept testing him until Charles finally stumbled out of the potions classroom, battered but elated. He had been beaten repeatedly, but he had learned practical combat. Even his system's legendary life bar had brightened a little. The experience seemed to have nudged it toward mythical status. It felt like a win. Charles' mind moved on to other problems. The Ministry potion had arrived and solved his immediate need. The experimental plot application would probably be approved soon, and he could ask Professor Sprout for more Devil's Snare roots. Once the first-level nodes were handled, he could plant in the new plot and cultivate Devil's Snare while progressing other projects. A familiar voice called from the corridor. "Charles, what exactly is Snape doing to you?" Charles turned and saw Hermione stepping out. He instinctively glanced for the invisibility cloak. Was that what they'd used to follow him? His expression soured. "Are you following me?" Harry and Ron emerged from beneath the cloak as well. Hermione hurried to explain, "We wanted to see what Snape had you doing in potions." Ron added, "But when we got near, we couldn't hear a word, just a buzzing sound." Harry looked excited. "We saw him giving you potions. We saw you hung up and being tormented by Snape. Torture you, then give you a reward. That's how he controls you, makes you obey him and protect him." Charles, already annoyed, was dumbfounded. "What? No. It's just training." They refused to listen. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had their minds made up. Charles couldn't stand up to Snape, so Snape manipulated him. Harry's pity turned sharp. "Charles, you have to resist. What are you afraid of?" Charles was tired of explaining. He had only one petty thought. If Snape washed his hair and tidied his appearance, people wouldn't have such prejudices. He turned to leave. "I'm not discussing this. I have other things to do. Bye." Hermione grabbed his sleeve. "Even if you won't confront Snape, at least tell us if you know Nicholas Flamel. We won't tell anyone it's you. Once Snape's conspiracy is exposed, you'll be safe. Helping us is helping yourself." Harry suddenly spoke with a fierce promise. "I'll guarantee your safety. I have an invisibility cloak. Wear it after class, and Snape will never find you. I can lend it to you. Just tell me who Nicholas Flamel is and what Snape's up to." Charles nearly walked away, but the mention of the cloak stopped him. The invisibility cloak was one of the Deathly Hallows, an incredibly rare and powerful artifact. He wasn't trying to collect all the Hallows, but he knew the disillusionment charm required for cultivating certain plants, especially shadow thorns, was beyond his current skill. The cloak's invisibility might substitute for disillusionment and let him cultivate shadow thorns. He turned, eyes bright. "Harry, can I borrow the invisibility cloak for a while?" Harry hesitated, then nodded, reluctant but firm. "Yes, but only if you tell us who Nicholas Flamel is and what Snape's plotting." Charles thought briefly. The trio would likely learn about Snape's scheme within a day or two anyway. Revealing it now wouldn't change much. He told them everything he knew about Nicholas Flamel. Late that night, the trio returned to the common room exhausted but triumphant. Without the cloak, avoiding Filch was trickier, but they were brimming with excitement. Now they finally understood Snape's goal, the Philosopher's Stone. The protections around it had been set by the professors. The three-headed dog was Hagrid's doing. Professor Sprout had arranged other defenses. Snape's efforts to control Charles made more sense. When Charles' name came up, even Ron, who had been sour earlier, felt a bit of sympathy. "The poor guy, Snape abuses him every night," he said. Inside the greenhouse, Charles held the invisibility cloak in his hands and barely contained his excitement. Sleep could wait. The cloak was on loan, and he had limited time. He had to make the most of it. He went straight to another Humping Willow sub-project, Shadow Thorns. The plant's rewards, water enhancement and wound-tearing effects, were very useful, especially water enhancement, which Charles was determined to obtain. But initial cultivation of shadow thorns required a disillusionment charm, which he couldn't cast reliably. "Let's see if the invisibility cloak will work for shadow thorns," he murmured. Charles draped the cloak over the shadow thorn's roots. The thorns vanished at once. No magical trace leaked while they were concealed. If he hadn't been holding a corner of the cloak and watching the reward indicator on his system, even a herbology master like Professor Sprout might not have been able to find them. Charles couldn't help but think, as expected of a Deathly Hallow, the cloak's effectiveness probably surpassed even Dumbledore's disillusionment spell. Now the question was whether the cloak's concealment would satisfy the Shadowthorn's cultivation requirement. He watched the reward information closely. Minute after minute passed with no change. Disappointment creased his face. He couldn't force the plant's reward to change. He lifted the cloak to reveal the roots. Immediately, the Shadowthorns writhed as if yearning for something stolen. Their magic pulsed with longing. The reward light above them flickered restlessly. Charles blinked. Huh? Why didn't you react like that under the cloak just now? He frowned. The roots seemed to plead. A moment later, they conveyed a feeling of bitter surprise. If the cloak had stayed on, they would have thought it a dream and not reacted. Charles was silent, thinking. Then he covered them again. In the next second, the reward indicator on his system began to blur. The faint silver light shifted and then burst into a brilliant gold. Charles shut his fist. His little silver bucket hadn't allowed the Devil's Snare reward to reach gold, but with the invisibility cloak's effect on Shadowthorns, his first mass-producible gold-level reward plant was a success. Chapter 123, Ancient Shadow Magic, Mysteries, Surprises. Ciel Sprout watched the reward information for the Shadowthorns with eager eyes as it underwent a dramatic change. For a moment, the display had become blurred, as if new text was forming. Then it cleared. As expected of the invisibility cloak among the Deathly Hallows, he murmured, it has an almost transformative effect on the Shadowthorns. The lines resolved into new rewards. The Shadowthorns you cultivated have been induced to produce a mutation with superior traits. Upon mature cultivation, the reward will upgrade to Shadow Enhancement, Gold Tier, Tearing Wound, Silver Tier. Both rewards were the same as before, except their tiers had risen by 1, gold and silver. Ciel Sprout's gaze moved to the final line, a very small amount of ancient shadow magic insight, Iron Tier. He was surprised. Another reward tied to ancient magic? So far, he had only seen ancient magic rewards from the Elber Tree's ancient weather magic and the Homping Willow's unknown ancient power. He hadn't expected the mutated Shadowthorns to yield anything related to ancient shadow magic. After the initial surprise, excitement swelled. The Elber Tree still had a long time before harvest. The Homping Willow's cultivation was even further off. Those ancient magics weren't something he could rely on soon. But Shadowthorns, now that he had broken the disillusionment charm threshold, were easy to raise, and he could plant them in batches. If the Shadowthorns could indeed provide ancient magic, he might be very close to obtaining it. He studied the line more closely and frowned. The ancient shadow magic reward wasn't stable. It kept appearing and vanishing. He had never seen that before. It's as if a necessary condition is still missing, he thought. He waited longer to be sure. The flickering line remained intermittent. That's right, he concluded. No wonder. The Elber Tree only offered diamond tier rewards at its peak, and only then did an ancient weather magic reward appear. The Shadowthorn's highest tier is only gold. Even with the invisibility cloak's induction, it's not simple for them to grant ancient magic. Still, this was the most accessible path toward ancient magic for him. Determined, he decided to check the library. Among the books Aunt left me are many records about cultivating Shadowthorns. There might be something here. He also remembered brushing past Quirrell earlier. Quirrell should not be wasting power to scheme against him, but better safe than sorry. Ciel slipped on the invisibility cloak. Unless Lord Voldemort himself awoke and used innate legilimency, the cloak's protection would be almost impossible to penetrate with magic. As soon as the cloak settled around him, a strange sensation rippled through him. The cloth itself was cool and unique, like flowing water, but the deeper change was in how his magic behaved. After obtaining Platinum Tier Night Vision, he'd learned that living things and magical objects emit tiny motes of magic, visible now as points of colored light. These particles normally diffused outward like gas. Under the cloak, however, something very odd happened. His own magic particles, which should have diffused out, could not penetrate the cloak. They were reflected and trapped, bouncing inside the cloak without escaping. Understanding dawned. The invisibility cloak doesn't just block sight and sound, it blocks the emission of magic itself. Any spell used to detect magic would be useless while the cloak is worn. It was more than impressive. With his current advancement in transfiguration and several charms at platinum tier, Xiaer's appreciation for the microscopic subtleties of magic had grown. If I describe it with my prior knowledge, the space inside the cloak acts like a magical black body. Magic particles can enter, but cannot radiate out. What sort of magic, what microscopic arrangement, could keep particles from escaping? The thought excited him. Whoever created the cloak had achieved astonishing transfiguration mastery. Even a sliver of understanding could boost his own talents dramatically. He recalled that in the original tale, Dumbledore had kept the cloak for study and only returned it to Harry later. Dumbledore's disillusionment charm would have been unbreakable to most, and what could Dumbledore really learn from the cloak unless its maker rivaled him in transfiguration? The cloak was a treasure trove, but with his present level, he could only admire it from afar, like a primary school student trying to grasp number theory. Forget it for now, he decided. The cloak will help me cultivate shadow thorns. When I'm stronger, I'll study its principles. For now, to the library, find the conditions that make ancient shadow magic reveal itself in shadow thorns. Cloaked, he made his way to the library. It was late at night and closed, but Madame Pince would not notice him under the cloak. He moved silently between the stacks and started reading the scarce literature on shadow thorns. Professor Sprout had left him. The records were obscure, small portions in Old English, the bulk in Latin with fragments of Hebrew and other ancient scripts. He felt grateful he had always done his essay assignments. Those had forced him to wrestle with Latin and Hebrew. Now he could at least translate the core ideas. Maybe that's why the professors made us do those essays, he mused, and plunged into the prefaces, tables of contents, and abstracts, hunting for any mention of ancient shadow magic. Time slipped by. Madame Pince's snores in the next room faded, and morning light crept over the pages in his hands. He closed the book gently and returned 3 volumes to their places. He crossed 4 of Professor Sprout's recommended reference books off his list. These are detailed on shadow thorns, excellent materials, but none of the abstracts mention ancient shadow magic, he thought. 17 books remained. I can finish these in 4 or 5 days. I hope there's some reward in them. If not, I'll have to search the restricted section or start experiments myself. He stepped out as breakfast approached. Voices and laughter spilled through the corridors. Then he heard familiar wings. He looked up to see Professor Sprout's owl circling the castle, confused. It couldn't find him. Of course, he was still under the cloak. He removed it. The owl relaxed, dropped a letter into his hand, and flew off. The note was brief. Xier, please come to the Great Hall at breakfast. There is an important matter you absolutely must not miss. His mind raced. What could be so important? It sounded unlike anything in the original plot, but with Professor Sprout's tone, he dared not ignore it. He hurried to the Great Hall. The doors were closed and the hall was quiet, not the usual bustle. Hesitant, he pushed the door a crack and slipped in. The room fell still. Every eye had turned to him. All 4 houses were nearly full. The professors occupied their seats. Even Dumbledore was there, expression grave. He inclined his head at Xier and said, "Since Xier has arrived, I think we may begin." Before Xier could figure out what was happening, a cacophony erupted from the Hufflepuff table, saluting cannons and fireworks, sparks and ribbons. The younger students produced flags from under their benches and waved them enthusiastically. Xier read the phrase printed across them, "Congratulations to Xier for publishing a paper in Herbology Frontiers and receiving the Herbology second-class medal. You are the pride of the house." He stood dazed as Dumbledore raised his wand and set off grander fireworks. The headmaster's voice carried through the hall. "Xier Sprout, you have set a record at Hogwarts in 3 centuries. You are the youngest student in 3 centuries to publish in a top disciplinary journal, and the only student in a century to receive the Herbology Association's second-class medal while still at school. As your headmaster, it is my honor to present this award to you, a rising star in herbology." At the same time, Dumbledore made a gesture and the House Cup hourglass appeared. Everyone watched as the sand in Hufflepuff's hourglass surged upward at unbelievable speed, far outstripping the others. Due to your outstanding academic performance, Hufflepuff gains 150 points. Now, child, come up to the stage. This medal is well deserved. Ciel stood frozen for a long moment before moving toward the dais. Fireworks and applause washed over him. He glanced at the students. Many genuinely rejoiced for him and saw Professor Sprout wiping away tears. Flitwick, McGonagall, and others wore proud smiles. Even Snape seemed less glowering than usual. Warmth bloomed in Ciel's chest. On the stage, Dumbledore leaned down, placing a medal engraved with a piranha algae pattern around his neck. He sighed with affectionate nostalgia. It's good to be young. It reminds me of my own youth. When I first received an award, don't laugh. All I could think about was how to spend the prize money. I was terribly poor then. A century passes in a blink. If you don't mind, Ciel, might you indulge an old man's curiosity? What are you thinking right now? Ciel told him quietly. I was thinking, could I have my experimental plot quota issued? I have so many trees waiting to be planted. Dumbledore blinked, then laughed heartily. That fits you perfectly. I'm afraid I have some bad news. The experimental plot quota? There isn't one. He paused, his smile turning sly. However, perhaps this will be an even better surprise. After the ceremony, you'll have half a day off. You may follow Professor Sprout and have a good look around. Ciel bristled inwardly. Dumbledore still loved suspense, but he wasn't about to complain in front of the hall. The chance to see whatever surprise awaited was a small consolation. When the ceremony ended, Professor Sprout beckoned him over. She wore a mysterious smile and led him away, sighing as they walked. To be honest, I never thought Dumbledore would be so generous. I'm almost envious. She guided him to a spot he had never been led to before. When he saw it, Ciel's eyes widened. He could hardly form the words. This? Where is this? Chapter 124, The Golden Cup, Bottleneck, Light, and Darkness. What waited for Char surprised him, a small, tent-like building that looked unremarkable from the outside. From Professor Sprout's tone, he'd already suspected it held more than it appeared. At her signal, Char opened the door and stepped inside. As he expected, an undetectable extension charm had been cast. The interior was far larger than the exterior suggested. More astonishing than the extra space was what lay within. A planting bench 5 meters long, shelves crammed with commonly used herbology potions and tools, and nearly 50 water tanks lined up neatly to form an aquatic cultivation area, each tank the same size as the one he'd used for piranha algae. The remaining beds, taken together, were probably 5 times the size of his previous experimental plot. Small as it was, the place had every essential facility. It was a miniature Hogwarts greenhouse. Char stared, stunned, while Professor Sprout watched him with a pleased smile. She handed him a bronze key. This small greenhouse is yours, she said. Aside from size, it's the same as the main greenhouse. It should be more than enough for you, Char. Seeing Char's bewildered look, she continued. I wanted to give you more space in the main greenhouse, but since you've begun cultivating some dangerous plants, you need more privacy. I remembered this little greenhouse. It fits the need perfectly. It had been abandoned for over a decade because of funding, but we received a large donation and I had it restored. It will be yours for the rest of your time at Hogwarts. Char's heart thudded. A greenhouse like this was every herbologist's dream. In his previous life, it would have been a top-tier laboratory that only the most powerful academics could assemble. He had never imagined he'd be given one. He also understood how much effort it must have taken Sprout to secure it, and how much pressure she'd endured arguing for it. Professor Sprout seemed to read his thoughts. As long as it helps you, she said softly. Don't worry, Headmaster Dumbledore supports this. With his backing, the school governors cannot stand in the way. As for how much your aunt had to do, she reached out and stroked his head. However much effort, however much cost, it was worth it. Char fell silent. Bittersweet emotion churned in him. Sprout then gave him a fuller history of the little greenhouse. I used this place when I was a student, she said. It was built long ago. Records say Helga Hufflepuff herself laid its foundation. She intended it to give herbologists the best possible environment. The soil back then was far superior to anything we have now. Not even a greenhouse built by a master herbologist over a lifetime, or by an ancient family across generations, could match it. Helga even managed to cultivate things like a homping willow here. The soil at that tree's roots still retains traces of the old magic. She sighed. But over time, especially after Hufflepuff's golden cup was lost, the greenhouse's magic faded. It's still very good, but without the nectar brewed in the golden cup to water the beds, it's not what it used to be. I can only hope the golden cup is ever recovered, so the nectar will flow again, and this greenhouse can regain its former power. Char's eyes widened as she spoke. The golden cup was more than a symbol. It brewed a nectar that, when used to irrigate the soil, elevated the greenhouse's conditions to extraordinary levels. Judging by Sprout's regret, the cup's enhancement must have been stupendous, valuable even to a master herbologist. But the cup had been lost for ages. Char knew its more recent history. A young Tom Riddle had tricked an elderly woman to get the cup, killed her, made it into a Horcrux, and it now rested in the Lestrange vault in Gringotts. If he could get it, the benefits to his planting would be enormous. His pulse quickened, but he forced himself to calm down. In the original timeline, Harry and his friends had broken into Gringotts and retrieved the cup, an act that made headlines and alerted Voldemort far earlier than otherwise. If Char attempted to acquire the cup openly, news would spread and Voldemort would learn of the Horcruxes sooner, possibly changing the course of the war. If Voldemort discovered who took the cup, it could mean unending conflict with him. So even though the cup tempted Char, he dismissed the thought. It wasn't the time. He'd have to wait until he could infiltrate Gringotts unseen. That train of thought led him to the Shadow Thorn's reward, ancient shadow magic. Shadow magics excel at concealment. If he could accumulate enough ancient shadow magic, perhaps he could slip into Gringotts' vaults undetected. He needed to figure out how the Shadow Thorn's ancient shadow magic formed. Standing beside Professor Sprout, Char asked directly, "Auntie, do you know of any connection between shadow thorns and an ancient magic called shadow magic?" She paused, puzzled. "I don't recall that. Ancient shadow magic? I've never heard of it." She studied him. "Where did you read that?" "I saw a rumor in a book," Char said. "I'm not sure which one." Sprout wasn't suspicious. Academia wasn't always as standardized. Some fabricated claims take hold for a time. You have to read established scholars to understand a subject properly. After giving him a few pointers, she left Char to familiarize himself with the greenhouse. He felt a little deflated. Even Sprout had never heard of using the Deathly Hallows invisibility cloak to cultivate shadow thorns instead of a disillusionment charm. Few studied shadow thorns at all, and the cloak was a treasure spoken of only in legend. The odds of finding records that combined those conditions were slim. Worst case, he'd have to research from scratch. With luck, he might uncover something in 3 to 5 days. With bad luck, it could take 30 to 50 years. Still, he held on to a sliver of hope. He'd keep looking through the reference books Sprout had mentioned. Maybe the details showed up in some overlooked chapter. Meanwhile, other matters were pressing. Devil's Snare was just as important as Shadow Thorns, and with the extra experimental plots and water tanks, Char could expand his guardian trees and piranha algae too. So he threw himself into work. The next week was the busiest he'd ever known. He had no free time, but by the end of it, the small greenhouse was far from empty. He transplanted the guardian tree he'd already raised and planted 10 more, increasing both protection and future harvest rewards. He tripled the piranha algae in the tanks. He also planted a portion of Devil's Snare, waiting for new branches to grow before processing nodes systematically. But the shadow thorns lingered at the back of his mind. He had skimmed every book in the library that touched on them, even sneaking into the restricted section under the invisibility cloak to search for references to ancient shadow magic. Still nothing. The restricted section itself offered little on ancient magics. Such knowledge was scarce even there. He was close, so close to the condition that would trigger the Shadow Thorn's ancient shadow magic reward, yet that final piece eluded him. The treasure mountain was within sight but untouchable, and it frustrated him. Another frustration grew. His progress in strength had slowed drastically. After mastering several charms to the platinum threshold, improving further became agonizingly difficult. Platinum-level charms dealt with microscopic precision and required keen magic perception. His gold-level magic perception was no longer enough. That was the bottleneck preventing him from advancing. Magic perception, being talent-limited, couldn't be trained up simply by practice. He would have to rely on the goldfish vine's reward once it matured. Reaching platinum mastery was still a long way off. Char sighed. It was hard. Then a letter from Hagrid arrived with good news. The new batch of goldfish vine had matured. Char brightened. 5 trolls had been raising the vines for him. One harvest would give a sizable increase in magic perception, possibly enough to push him toward platinum and break through the bottleneck. He hurried to Hagrid's hut. Hagrid had tea steaming on the stove and dragon liver cake fresh from the oven. Char babbled about the dragon egg's changes over the past week and what to name it. "How about Norbert?" Char suggested, following the original story. Hagrid's face lit up. "Norbert? Good name." He leaned over the egg, grinning. "Little one, did you hear that? Norbert, you have a name. When you're born, we'll have the whole Forbidden Forest celebrate your birthday." Char smiled. The tea and cake chased some of his gloom away. Just as he was about to harvest the goldfish vine, Hagrid's expression grew grave. "Oh, right, Char," Hagrid said. "Stay out of the Forbidden Forest for a bit. Don't go in." Char stiffened. "Why?" "There's something odd. Lots of creatures there have felt a foul, evil magic lingering. It's been searching where unicorns leave traces." Char's mind snapped to the two-faced man, someone hunting unicorns for their blood to restore strength. "Understood. You be careful too, Hagrid. If you sense anything wrong, don't fight it head-on." Hagrid muttered, uneasy. "Where that thing shows up, it's where unicorns have been. It's looking for them. I don't know what it is. But the rumors might be true. Creatures as bright and sacred as unicorns draw evil. The stronger the light, the denser the shadow." As Hagrid spoke, the line struck a chord in Char's head. The stronger the light, the denser the shadow. He felt a flash of insight. An idea he'd been missing suddenly snapped into place. "I know what's missing," he thought. Chapter 125. Formation, Trouble, Power. Cier's eyes went bright. The gloomy cloud that had hung over him for days was suddenly rent apart. He finally understood the formation condition for the ancient shadow magic reward hidden in the shadow thorns. Light. Without light, there are no shadows. The stronger the light, the denser the shadow that appears. The greenhouse's lamps were designed to give bright, diffuse light so every plant could thrive, not the intense, focused beams that would produce deep, concentrated shadows. No wonder the shadow thorn's reward had always been flickering, never fully forming. Excitement chased away his fatigue. He left Hagrid's hut in such a hurry he forgot to harvest the newly ripened goldfish vine and rushed back to the small greenhouse. He took out the piece of shadow thorn's root. The reward text that hovered in front of his eyes was the same as before. Extremely small amount of ancient shadow magic insight, black iron grade. It still flickered. Char drew his wand and cast Lumos. The familiar light bloomed from the tip. He added another Lumos and trained the extra beam on the root. The reward text stayed flickering, but now remained visible a bit longer. "It works," he breathed, "but a normal Lumos might still be too weak. Increase the intensity." He cast Lumos again, concentrating not just on brightness, but on the internal makeup of the spell. In his mind, he saw miniature Lumos particles, each one a tiny point of light vibrating at its own frequency. Using the frequency light technique he'd learned from Professor Flitwick, he adjusted those particles, aligning their frequencies to make the overall beam far more concentrated. He had tried similar ideas once before, back when his Lumos was only platinum grade and his magic perception was poor. That attempt had failed. Now his magic perception had risen from silver to gold. Many charms were platinum grade, and he had a much better feel for microscopic differences in spells. He could push farther. At first, only a few particles synchronized and the beam became noticeably narrower and brighter. The reward text grew clearer and the shadows under the light deepened. Ciel almost imagined the shadows writhing as if they were alive. He held his breath and pushed harder, forcing nearly half the particles into the same frequency. The beam shrank to the size of a searchlight. Its center flared with searing brightness. The effort surged through him. Controlling that many particles at once was exponentially more taxing than the first step. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His temples throbbed as if his mind were straining against a vice. He was close to overloading. Then the reward text stopped flickering. The message was fully formed, the dark iron sheen of the grade denser than before. Even after the blinding beam dissipated, the information remained steady. Ciel sagged to the ground, rubbing his aching temples as the pressure eased. When his vision adjusted, the greenhouse seemed darker than before. He had become used to the intense light. But even without it, the shadow cast by the shadowthorn's root remained unusually deep. Under his gaze, the shadow began to move, slowly at first, like something stirring beneath a blanket. Then the shadow reached toward him, its tendrils weaving outward in a sinuous motion. The shapes intertwined and coalesced into a monstrous maw of shadow that seemed to open and let out an ancient, wordless roar. Ciel's hand tightened on his wand. On the edge of the forbidden forest, Quirrell hurried from the gloom toward the castle, kneeling as he ran. His face was pale and drawn. In his mind, Lord Voldemort's cold, furious voice echoed. "Quirrell," the voice said, "why are you borrowing my power again? The unicorn still hasn't been found, and this is the third time." Quirrell's expression flickered between fear and hatred. He gritted his teeth and answered in his head. "Master, the Forbidden Forest is full of dangers. I went to the area where unicorns were sighted and found a nest of acromantulas. It must be Hagrid's fault. And the professors, every night they patrol the forest. They take turns. Dumbledore is exploiting them with his duties. How many galleons is a professor paid a month? Their patrols are interfering with my search." Lord Voldemort listened, and after a moment of consideration replied without much surprise. Blows and rewards were his way. "There is no other way. If we cannot find the unicorn soon, the power loss will be too severe. We won't get through the checkpoints. Quirrell, write an anonymous letter to Lucius Malfoy. Tell him to cause trouble at Hogwarts, to distract Dumbledore and the professors. Use this method to bypass tracking and get the letter to him directly." Quirrell's shoulders relaxed with relief. "Yes, Master. If Lucius Malfoy can distract them, I will find the unicorn." Back in his room, Quirrell disguised his handwriting and wrote the letter. He waved his wand and burned it in a strange black flame that left no ash. At Malfoy Manor, the flame coalesced and the letter formed within it. Lucius Malfoy stiffened, staring at the black fire. A phantom twinge of pain traveled along his forearm where, in dark memory, a mark had once sat. He had only seen this method of delivery once before. Panic, years in the rear, rose in him. He stared at the contact details for the ministry and Dumbledore displayed in the letter, and then looked away to the family portrait on his desk. The letter's audacity, how it had ignored the manor's defenses, made his hands shake as he picked it up. The content was not a summon to kill or a meeting of Death Eaters. It asked Lucius to use his influence as a school governor to stir trouble for Hogwarts, to keep Dumbledore and the faculty busy for a while. It was a favor, not a command. Dangerous, but far preferable to the worst outcomes he had feared. Lucius let out a long breath, and after calming himself, began to plan. The image of today's awards ceremony at Hogwarts flashed through his mind, his objection to granting Sharp Sprout access to the small greenhouse. True, he had objected partly to stand up for Draco and preserve the school board's prerogatives, but now he had a better reason. If the board made a fuss, Dumbledore would be occupied. He took up his quill and began a reply. "Dearest," he wrote aloud under his breath, then paused, muttering, "Dearest father? No. What am I saying?" He fumbled for the right tone and put the pen to paper again. Inside the small greenhouse, Ciel was already on full alert, heart hammering as the shadow tendrils crept toward him. He watched, hand tight on his wand, as the shadow paused and then, impossibly, formed words in its dark surface. The first line spelled out a single, unmistakable word, "Father." Ciel's mind stalled. The shadow-writ word seemed to nod once, then formed another word, "Father." The magical aura around the shadow thorns brightened several shades. No hint of malign alteration showed. The plant hadn't gone to some dark arts mutation, and yet it was clearly expressing recognition, even emotion, as if it truly saw him as its parent. Ciel blinked, equal parts astonished and unsure. He'd read about magical plants that had feelings, even speech or near-human intelligence, but nothing in his books had mentioned shadowthorns doing this. Had the cloak, the Deathly Hallows invisibility cloak, together with the ancient shadow magic influence, caused this specimen to mutate into a new subspecies? Was he the father of a plant that had just become conscious and literate? He clicked his tongue and settled on something practical. I know many magical plants have emotions, he murmured, more to himself than to the plant. Some can speak, others have near-human intelligence. This is new. He crouched and looked at the dark mass flowing from the root. Son, he said, testing. Ah, no. I'll call you Shadow, he added aloud. Is that your shadow? Is that what you mean by ancient shadow magic? The shadow rippled as if puzzled. It probably didn't yet know the term ancient shadow magic. To test it, he pointed at a nearby stone and gave a simple command. Use your shadow. Attack that rock. The shadow surged. A section of its mass swept forward and wrapped itself around the stone like some living creature. Silence filled the greenhouse as the hard rock was torn into fragments. Ciel stared, a sudden flash of understanding and excitement igniting in him. This power. Chapter 126. Shadow, Nutrients, Nature. Ciel watched the stone shatter beneath the creeping darkness and felt a jolt of excitement. Shadow thorns, their magic tied to shadows, were more powerful than he'd expected. Even more striking, the attack left only a trail of shadow on the ground, and that trail could be redirected to strike from behind. An enemy confronted with such an odd assault would have a hard time reacting. From that alone, shadow thorns were incredibly practical, combat-ready plants. His eyes brightened. Use everything you've got. Keep attacking, he ordered. At once, the shadow thorns sank, melting into their own shadow. The darkness on the floor spread like a web, 5 or 6 meters across. Then the thorns burst up through the shadow somewhere along the edge and pierced another rock as if it were paper. At the wound sites, Ciel noticed a strange residual magic, quietly eroding the stone. Each new discovery deepened his excitement. This wasn't an ordinary shadow thorn. It could manipulate shadows, slip around unseen, and strike suddenly. The threat was far greater. And this was only a young plant. If it matured, even experienced aurors or Death Eaters might take heavy losses on first encounter. 10 of these, 100. Ciel's imagination raced. The shadow began to sway, as if sensing his praise. He smiled. Good. Grow strong. In a year or so, when you're grown up, Father will depend on you. The shadow swayed harder, and numbers flashed up, one after another. 1, 2, 3, 5 years. I can protect Father. Ciel froze. What? He had read that shadow thorns were relatively fast growers, typically a little over a year to 2 years to maturity, sometimes as little as half a year under exceptional conditions. Hogwarts' greenhouse conditions were among the best in the magical world, and he'd been using the Deathly Hallows invisibility cloak, not some lesser charm. Why would maturation take longer? The shadow's reply was almost plaintive. Shadow needs to eat. There's not much here. Its dark tendril probed the soil beneath the little greenhouse. Only a little underground. Have to eat sparingly. Ciel's expression tightened. The mutation must have altered the plant's nutritional needs. The little greenhouse soil had once been watered with an elixir brewed from Hufflepuff's golden cup, Professor Sprout had said. That miracle soil was a cultivation wonder. Perhaps, now that the shadow thorn had acquired ancient shadow magic, it required nourishment from the golden cup's elixir to mature rapidly. Without those nutrients, its growth slowed. The plant was now surviving on residual elixir deep in the soil. If so, mass cultivating these mutated shadow thorns was out of the question. The remaining nutrients simply wouldn't stretch. Ciel had thought before about taking the golden cup for its elixir, but that was a problem too difficult to solve quickly. He exhaled and forced himself to be practical. For now, I'll use the invisibility cloak to cultivate ordinary shadow thorns, he told himself. Variants that carry ancient shadow magic need special conditions, too rare for me at the moment. Even plain shadow thorns are valuable. Water enhancement and the ability to tear and erode, those are already very useful. Still, he couldn't help feeling a sting of regret at having the old magic so close and not being able to fully harvest it. The shadow seemed to feel his mood. It crept over, wrapping around his leg like a small, pleading animal. Ciel paused. He hadn't truly felt the reality of a sentient plant before. The shadow thorn's plaintive touch made that reality undeniable. He reached out and patted the shadow gently. It's okay. I'll try to find you better food. For now, make do. The shadow danced joyfully again. Charles smiled, but then he slapped his forehead. A better idea had just struck him. Harvesting ancient shadow magic insights by growing many of these plants was one route. But this plant itself possessed ancient shadow magic, and it spoke, and it could perform the magic. Couldn't he ask it to teach him? Shadow Thorn, he asked, can you teach me ancient shadow magic? Can you show me how you control shadows? The shadow wavered, puzzled. To it, the ability was innate. It didn't know how to teach. Charles realized that and adjusted his request. Manipulate the shadow right in front of me. Keep it simple. Slow it down. Make the process clearer. Cautiously, the shadow thorns obeyed. A small patch of shadow moved deliberately on the ground. Charles fixed his gaze and focused his magic perception. Fortunately, his platinum-grade magic perception could register shadows. He began to sense the subtle currents within the darkness. The magic looked unlike anything he'd seen. Tiny black points of mana, the common magical particles in the air entering the plant, colliding, exchanging components, and then being expelled, while some remaining particles turned into black light points in his vision. The nature of the magic inside the shadow thorn had changed compared to the magic that entered it. It was as if a chemical reaction had occurred. An insight crossed his mind. He remembered Severus Snape's demonstration of potion transfiguration. He hadn't understood the details then, but there had been a similarity. The magic underwent a fundamental change. Perhaps this was an advanced application of transfiguration, transforming magic at a microscopic level, changing its properties to give it new effects. Charles' eyes shone. Maybe the highest achievements in transfiguration weren't just turning things into other things, but changing the very nature of magic, what McGonagall focused on in Living Transformations, and what he'd seen in the titanic duel between Dumbledore and Voldemort. Those masters didn't use ordinary spells. Every spell's power and form had been altered. If one could alter the form and nature of magic itself, then transfiguration reached a different summit. He couldn't be certain his chain of reasoning was flawless, but there was a way to check. He glanced at the system panel and saw a gratifying change. His newly acquired transfiguration skill, bronze grade, was glowing more brightly. Charles had only recently pulled his transfiguration up to bronze after a semester of study. Now, by observing the Shadow Thorn's magical processes and clarifying a framework for form and nature change in magic, his transfiguration understanding had leapt forward. It felt like hearing a master explain a century's worth of study in a moment. If he could push further in transfiguration, it would break the bottleneck that had stalled his other progress. Several charms stuck at platinum, magic perception still short of platinum, and his magical strength only improvable after the next Margaret harvest. Learning from the Shadow Thorns might yield even more if he could grasp some ancient shadow magic. He steadied himself. Wild dreams were useless without hard practice. He focused on the small moving shadow, trying to reproduce the plant's manipulations with his wand. When you don't understand something, imitation is the fastest path to comprehension, an axiom from his previous life. He would learn the mechanics of magical change first, and even a little understanding would amplify his transfiguration. It was grueling work. His magic perception wasn't fully platinum, and even with enhancement and a water state, maintaining that level of focus was like trying to read a blackboard through thick fog. He strained his eyes and tightened his concentration until veins pulsed at his temples and a headache bloomed from mental exhaustion. He didn't mind. Learning had always come with fatigue. He'd regretted not working hard enough once before. He wouldn't make the same mistake again. Sweat dropped onto the shadow as his focus wavered and then tightened again. The system's transfiguration glow deepened slowly, almost imperceptibly. Night passed into dawn. At last, after one last meticulous wand movement, the bronze glow at his panel peaked, and from its edge a faint thread of copper light began to diffuse outward. Chapter 127, Progress, Meetings, Surprise. A faint bronze glow flickered around the word transfiguration. Even though his mind was exhausted, Charles couldn't hide his joy. If he kept practicing like this, it wouldn't be long before his transfiguration advanced to bronze level. And given how important transfiguration was in the field of magic, the qualitative leap it would bring might be far greater than other charms advancing. The thought lifted his spirits, and the mental fatigue seemed to vanish, replaced by a surge of motivation. Shadow! Continue! Shadow Thorns lay weakly sprawled on the floor, its shadow dancing in a pitiful, exhausted way. Tired, Charles looked at the drained creature, and a helpless smile crossed his face. Fine, let it rest. Child labor still needed limits. He wasn't a monster. In a few months, when Shadow had grown stronger, it could work like an ox. For now, it deserved a happy childhood. His gaze fell on the empty plots in the little greenhouse. The special nutrients there could only sustain Shadow temporarily. Since this one, Shadow Thorns, had awakened ancient shadow magic, Charles decided not to wait. A bird in the hand was worth two in the bush. He would plant a batch of ordinary Shadow Thorns. They might not carry rewards tied to ancient shadow magic, but even the gold-level shadow enhancement and silver-level tearing wound traits were extremely valuable. Charles headed for Professor Sprout's office to ask for more Shadow Thorns roots. When he arrived and found the office empty, he frowned. Auntie isn't here? He checked the time. Though it was still early for most students, a dedicated gardening student in his previous life, or a herbology master in this one, would normally be up by now. Plants had routines. Morning was the best time to tend them. He asked a Hufflepuff house elf and learned that Professor Sprout had been called to an emergency meeting. An emergency meeting? All the deans and professors of required subjects? Charles repeated, puzzled. What's so urgent? In the conference room, the professors' faces were strained. The Board of Governors called an emergency session first thing this morning, one muttered. To conduct some sort of Hogwarts subject review? Another added. We have to turn over all teaching materials from the past 7 years, graduation rates, university placement, lab usage records. Everything? Snape said darkly. Even with his connection to Lucius Malfoy, he looked displeased. If you noble lords have nothing better to do, go green the Forbidden Forest, tile the bottom of the Black Lake. Don't make trouble for us. The members of the board looked equally sour. All eyes turned to Lucius Malfoy, who sat at the head of the table, expression unreadable. He produced a report and spoke coolly. Professors, do not misunderstand. The board has no intention of interfering with Hogwarts teaching. His voice was even. However, regarding the matter from the last hearing, although it was a misunderstanding, the board unanimously agrees this must not happen again. At the last business meeting, the use of the little greenhouse by young Mr. Sprout was raised. I objected on the spot, Lucius continued, but Headmaster Dumbledore and Professor Sprout said there was precedent and the decision stood. I reviewed historical data, especially the resumes of students granted use of the little greenhouse, and found some issues. He read from the report. The previous student granted little greenhouse access only received it in the second semester of their 5th year, after publishing several high-quality papers and one top-tier journal article. They didn't disappoint. While using the greenhouse, they produced 2 major achievements. Going further back, nearly every student awarded little greenhouse access had similar records, usually in their 4th or 5th year, already stable in herbology, and capable of sustained, high-quality output after obtaining the greenhouse. In other words, sustained output of high-quality academic work is the essential condition for granting little greenhouse access, Lucius said, tapping the table. From this perspective, young Mr. Sprout does not yet prove he can deliver continuous results. He is still too young and too unstable. We, the board, called this meeting to better understand Hogwarts' academic system and achievements, and to evaluate the use of these public teaching resources so we can provide targeted support. I don't think the professors will refuse, will you? He added, almost casually, oh, and for well-known reasons, defense against the dark arts won't be necessary. Then he looked to Dumbledore. What do you say? Professor Sprout was furious. This was a direct attack on Charles' use of the little greenhouse, and it extended to all of Hogwarts' subjects. The other professors were not pleased either. Examining public teaching resources, clarifying the academic system, sounds reasonable, but it's just a way to make trouble, one dean grumbled. Snape's irritation flickered and then turned to thought. He knew Lucius well. He was always prone to grandstanding, but rarely made enemies without benefit. If Lucius had pushed this, there had to be something in it for him. Dumbledore, watching Lucius, remained composed. His eyes looked like they were seeing under the surface, calm on the outside, wary within. After a moment, Dumbledore spoke. "All right, we will prepare the requested materials as completely as possible," he said. "But you're asking for a great deal. We'll need at least a week to compile everything." Relief washed visibly over Lucius. "No rush, no rush," he said quickly, and as if afraid Dumbledore might change his mind, he and the board members rose and left the room. The professors remained in an awkward silence. Quirrell broke it first, stammering to Dumbledore. Headmaster, I'm not feeling well." Dumbledore forced a smile and even managed a light tease. "Of course, you haven't fully recovered. Go rest. We'll make them pay for inconveniencing you." Quirrell left gratefully, an oddly pleased curl at his mouth. For about a week, he wouldn't have to contend with the professors on night duty and could use the time to search for the unicorn. Lord Voldemort's voice echoed in his mind, promising covert rewards to Lucius and generous recognition to Quirrell if he secured the Philosopher's Stone. Quirrell's step, once weak, grew firmer as he strode toward the Forbidden Forest. When Quirrell left, Professor Sprout turned to Dumbledore, red with anger. "Why did you agree to their unreasonable demands? My Charles has legendary potential. Who are they to question him? Lucius Malfoy, if he dares interfere with Charles, I'll put a biting cabbage on his head." Dumbledore softened her fury. "Don't worry, Pomona. The so-called academic review is probably just an excuse Lucius seized upon to stir trouble. He likely doesn't relish this either. After the motions are gone through, this will pass and the little greenhouse will remain Charles." Hearing that, Professor Sprout calmed. The other deans nodded, thoughtful but grim. They were already busy. Another bureaucratic exercise was the last thing they needed. "All right, meeting adjourned. Everyone prepare those materials." Each left with a burdened expression. Professor Sprout huffed back to her office, and there sat Charles, waiting. She forced a smile. "Charles, you came early today?" Charles noticed her mood. "Auntie, what's wrong? I heard you went to a meeting. What could be so urgent this morning?" Sprout waved a hand, masking the truth. If there was something deeper going on, it was better Charles not know. "Oh, Dumbledore's been playing at routine inspections," she said breezily. "We cornered him in the conference room and gave him a good scolding." She immediately changed the subject. "What can I do for you?" Charles followed her lead. "Auntie, I'd like a few more Shadowthorn's roots." Sprout nodded automatically and then froze. "Shadowthorn's roots? Charles, you can use the disillusionment charm now?" Charles shook his head. "No." Sprout's face registered genuine surprise. "If you can't use disillusionment, how did you cultivate Shadowthorns?" "There's a new method," Charles said simply. That answer widened her eyes. She had been distracted these past days and missed academic journals, but a new cultivation technique for Shadowthorns. Who had published it? Which herbology master had made a breakthrough? "Where did you find this method? Which paper? Which professor?" Charles hesitated only a moment. "It probably hasn't been published yet, and it wasn't made by any herbology master." He tapped his chest lightly. "I created it myself last week." Professor Sprout's expression went rigid, her eyes widening in disbelief. Chapter 128, Legend, Awards, Q&A. Professor Sprout stared at Char as if someone had just conjured a puffskein out of thin air. It took her a long moment to react. She was completely flustered. Shadowthorns were a delicate subject. Every master herbologist had always insisted that they must be cultivated under a disillusionment charm. And here was Char, without a word of protest, claiming he'd found another way. If anyone else had told her, she would have suspected a charlatan selling snake oil. But she trusted Char. Once the initial shock faded, it was as if she'd been injected with adrenaline. Her earlier melancholy vanished and was replaced by elation. "Show me. Take me to the little greenhouse." When they arrived, her gaze went straight to Shadow. With the trained eye of a master herbologist, she could immediately tell that it was a genuinely successful Shadowthorns, its traits far stronger than the usual specimens. "This can already be called a superior variety, can't it?" she breathed. Professor Sprout felt as if she were dreaming. Most herbology masters would be satisfied to optimize one magical plant and create a new subspecies once in their lifetime. Char had been at Hogwarts a little over a semester. Blood emerald, piranha algae, and now Shadowthorns, 3 new varieties already. The thought made her glow with pride. It made her happier than if she'd achieved top results herself. Once she'd composed herself enough to ask, her curiosity as a scientist took over. Char, how did you do it? Is there a special method? Char shook his head. Nothing special. I just thought that the disillusionment charm is a form of invisibility. The cloak of invisibility is also invisibility. Maybe the cloak could substitute for the disillusionment charm. Sprout frowned. Is that all? This idea isn't new, Char said quietly. Herbologists have tried using the best invisibility cloaks they could find before, but it didn't work. Perhaps the cloaks they used weren't good enough. For example, they didn't use the one passed down in the Potter family for nearly 1,000 years, still strong and almost undetectable by ordinary countermeasures. He demonstrated. Under the Potter cloak, a section of Shadow Thorn's root passed the cultivation threshold that had stumped everyone else. Professor Sprout gasped. So it could be done that way. The method had been dismissed only because the cloaks used previously were inferior. Char flushed a little. So actually, this method isn't of much practical value. Genius! Sprout cut him off, her face alight. Char, you really are a genius in herbology. Only a genius would dare challenge accepted wisdom and open new possibilities. Practical value is for the vulgar to worry about. Creation is what matters, and this is a breakthrough. Char blinked. But if someone else borrows that cloak, they could reproduce this. Sprout puffed up with pride. Then why don't they borrow it? Connections are a kind of strength. Only someone like you, Char, could have the connections to use that cloak and the mind to think this way. Her eyes shone and she clapped her hands. I've got it. I already thought of a title for the paper. A revolutionary method to bypass the disillusionment charm requirement in Shadowthorn's cultivation. Another top journal article, reserved. Char felt a little dizzy. The power of a herbology aunt, top journal articles drafted on a whim. In his previous life, he'd envied academic tyrants. Now he felt like one. Sprout sighed. It's a pity. Christmas has passed. New Year, too. The Herbology Association awards for last year are already handed out. If your Shadow Thorns had been published last year, you might have had a chance at the Young Herbology Master Award. She sounded genuinely regretful. Char didn't know much about those awards. But I already got the Herbology Association's second-class medal. Isn't the Young Herbology Master Award that important? She shook her head gravely. They're not comparable. The second-class medal is rare and honorable, but the Young Herbology Master Award comes with real benefits. To encourage young masters, the association gives treasured collections to the winners, alchemical items useful in herbology, rare potions needed to cultivate precious plants, even seeds of ancient plants. Some of those seeds are as ancient as the Homping Willow. Char's eyes lit up. The Homping Willow was practically a top-tier plant. If he could get more items like that, he wouldn't pass them up. Sprout regretted not timing publications to give him better award chances. Many hopefuls published 2 top journal papers in the same year to be eligible. I should have planned that. Char thought for a moment, then pointed at a nearby devil's snare. Auntie, do you think this devil's snare could be published in a top journal? Sprout stopped, her attention snapping to the plant. She'd been focused on the shadow thorns and hadn't even noticed the devil's snare. But now, looking closely, her face went slack. Even in an early stage, it was clearly an improved subspecies. Char, don't tell me you created this method too? Char hesitated, then nodded. I think so. An improved method for devil's snare based on Sectum Sempra. Do you think that title would work? He even mentioned the blood emerald. Soon we might be able to cultivate the blood emerald in batches. Should we publish another paper then? 3 papers. Would that be enough to go for this year's Young Herbology Master Award? Sprout took a deep breath, then another. Her face suddenly flushed. She rushed out of the little greenhouse and in less than a moment returned with a large handful of shadow thorns roots, thrusting them into Char's hand. Then she hurried away again. Char stood there, stunned, about to follow, when a loud, uncharacteristic laugh came from outside the greenhouse, boisterous and proud. My Char, a legendary talent. Who stands at the peak of herbology? All the rest are naught before Char. Since my Char has emerged, he shall suppress all rivals in the herbology world. Ha! Char swallowed. He looked after Sprout with a worried expression. Is Auntie's mental state really okay? Not long after, when Sprout barged into Dumbledore's office, the headmaster was equally bewildered. "Pomona, did you eat some strange herb? Are you all right?" she beamed. "I'm fine. I feel wonderful." Dumbledore, remembering how furious she'd been earlier at the meeting, kept wiping cold sweat from his brow. "All right, calm down a bit. Regarding Char's use of the little greenhouse, I won't let a so-called review committee." Sprout laughed. "Let them review. Let them review however they like. I didn't come to talk about that." Dumbledore watched, baffled, as she pulled out a length of Devil's Snare. With a tap of her wand, it came alive and wrapped around the corner of Dumbledore's walnut desk, twisting so violently that a corner of the desk snapped off. He stared, wide-eyed. He'd seen Sprout's Devil's Snare used in the Philosopher's Stone puzzle before, but never with this power. "Dumbledore," she said, cold and certain, "I plan to replace all the Devil's Snare in my obstacle with this variety, and I'm coating them with a layer of fire-resistant sap and venom." Dumbledore's heart dropped. "Pomona, wouldn't that be a bit much?" Before he could finish, Sprout slammed a pot of biting cabbage onto his desk and roared, swearing between teeth. "Char is the shining star of the Sprout family. If anyone causes trouble for my Char, they will know what it is to anger me. Anger me, and that will be the real trouble." Dumbledore shivered. So it was true. Don't provoke the head of a house. If pushed too far, their retaliation could be terrifying. "All right, Pomona," he said quickly. "We'll do as you say. Just temper it a bit. Don't kill anyone with the second obstacle." Char relaxed. With Sprout's expertise, this was clearly not mere madness. He looked down at the handful of Shadowthorn's roots in his hand and felt his heart race. If he planted them in the little greenhouse and kept their ancient shadow magic dormant, with the greenhouse's excellent conditions, he might harvest them before the end of the second school year. Dozens of golden reward orbs, just thinking of them made his pulse quicken. But even with the invisibility cloak, processing so many roots would be a major task. He would have to take his time. He glanced at the clock. Class is about to start. Transfiguration? He'd had new insights into transfiguration, and there were many unresolved questions. Skipping class to plant would be foolish. The Shadowthorns wouldn't yield for months anyway. Improving his transfiguration skills would have an immediate benefit. He set off toward the transfiguration classroom, brimming with questions. Hermione had also arrived early. Since the last transfiguration lesson, when she'd realized Char had surpassed her, she'd been studying harder than before. She had reduced the time she spent on the trio's Philosopher's Stone discussions to focus on transfiguration. Her goal was simple. She would never come second in any subject. Clutching her heavily annotated notes, she was confident she would reclaim first place. 5 minutes later, the bell rang. Professor McGonagall cleared her throat. "All right, last time I assigned homework. Now for the routine Q&A. Does anyone have questions about the previous transfiguration lesson?" Char and Hermione raised their hands at the same time, but Char was a fraction faster. McGonagall motioned for him to speak. "Professor," Char said, curiosity bright in his voice, "I observed a phenomenon where different types of magic collide at a microscopic level, causing a reaction that produces a new form of magic. I have some questions about that." The classroom fell silent. The other students exchanged nervous looks. The pressure from the top student was palpable. Hermione's face went blank. She had followed Char's last conversation with McGonagall well enough, but this was unfamiliar territory. McGonagall's eyes locked on Char. A brilliant light flared in them. Chapter 129, Pinnacle, Growth, Tempering. Professor McGonagall stared at Char with an intensity that erased her usual dignified composure. Shock showed plainly on her face. What Char had described about changes in the nature of magic, though he had used terms foreign to the Transfiguration Academy, matched her own private intuitions. This was no longer a surface issue. It grazed the true essence of transfiguration. She had never expected to hear such depth from a first-year student. Even in her own first year, she had not possessed this understanding. She had only heard of how Dumbledore had astonished his transfiguration professor, how that professor had declared the boy would become a monument in transfiguration. Now, looking at Char, McGonagall understood the feeling that Professor must have had. It was similar, but not the same. Dumbledore's talent had been obvious to everyone. Magic perception and intensity came to him as easily as breath. Char, by contrast, had no obvious natural gift. That he could reach this level of insight in a single semester was in some ways more astonishing. How much toil and sacrifice must have gone into it. A surge of regret and wonder passed over McGonagall. Heaven was unfair. If Char had been born with greater raw talent, he might have become the next Dumbledore. She collected herself and, with admiration in her voice, addressed him. "Char," she said, "what you feel is correct. Few at your age reach such insights. This shows you have an extraordinary intuition for transfiguration." Her praise stunned the little badgers and the little lions. McGonagall was not one to lavish words lightly. Her approval carried weight. Even Hermione, who had long been favored, had never been praised at such length. Char felt embarrassed. He knew the truth. There was no innate prodigy in him. His grasp came from mastering several platinum-grade charms, which allowed him to perceive magic at a microscopic level, and from Shadow's repeated slow-motion replays, which let him trace changes in magical properties. He had not expected McGonagall to call him a rare transfiguration prodigy. After a moment, McGonagall stopped praising and addressed Char's questions directly. "Most of your observations are right," she said, "but there are a few misconceptions I should clarify. At the microscopic level, transfiguration does indeed branch in two directions. One is what we teach beginners, turning a match into a silver needle, a table into a teapot, or, at higher levels, animating statues and armor for battle. In our field, that line of work is associated with Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration, Gamp being the one who laid the foundations of classical transfiguration. We call that the classical direction. The other direction is what you called changes in properties, turning sparks into lightning, floods into swamps, or conjuring objects with unique magical qualities, say a mithril shield that resists most magic. Those ideas came from Tollerman, a transfiguration master several centuries ago. At first, people thought he was mad. His concepts seemed to contradict Gamp's. Tollerman argued that his findings and Gamp's were simply different manifestations of a higher transfiguration law. Over the next centuries, his ideas gained acceptance. About 150 years ago, Tollerman's direction was formally recognized. It's often called the New Wave direction of transfiguration. Char listened closely. This material hadn't appeared in first-year textbooks in his previous life. They taught only Gamp. He guessed why. Just as many high school conclusions are overturned in university, young wizards aren't ready for overly abstract concepts. Throwing Tollerman at first years would be like teaching advanced mathematics to children. Only a 1 in 10,000 prodigy would thrive. Most would lose interest. McGonagall continued, correcting Char's remaining misunderstanding. Tollerman's ideas and Gamp's are different expressions of a greater rule. Gamp's methods are easier for beginners. Tollerman's have a higher barrier. But neither is inherently superior. Anyone who reaches the forefront in either direction can be a transfiguration master. Academia evolves. Tollerman's work actually contained many of Gamp's fundamental theorems, and since then the classical school has absorbed much from Tollerman's discoveries. A Tollerman master must understand Gamp. A Gamp master usually dabbles in Tollerman. It's a mistake to think one is stronger than the other. Only by mastering both to a profound degree does one truly approach the pinnacle of transfiguration. It's exceedingly difficult. She sighed with wistful longing. In my years, I have seen or heard of only 3 people achieve that level. They changed the magical world. Perhaps some were morally dubious, but that does not erase their achievements. Child, perhaps you have a slight hope of becoming the 4th. Her words dropped the classroom into silence. The little badgers' eyes lit with pride. They didn't fully understand the academic nuance, but they could sense McGonagall's expectations. Their house had the top transfiguration student. Even the little lions felt uneasily competitive. Hermione especially looked stung. Char's attention, though, was on his system panel. After McGonagall's careful explanation, the faint bronze sheen beside transfiguration on the panel had spread nearly half again. If he had had to puzzle this out alone, it might have taken him weeks to make that progress. Joy crept onto his face. When the bell rang, McGonagall asked him to stay after class and gave him the password to her office, saying he could come anytime with transfiguration questions. Char felt a warm gratitude. In his previous life, his mentors often showed him patience. Hogwarts professors were different, towering figures of scholarship who truly welcomed inquiry. Leaving the classroom, Char's spirits lifted further. A message from Hagrid arrived. Another batch of goldfish vine had matured after the catalytic effect of the trolls during his shadow thorns cultivation. Char hurried to Hagrid's hut and harvested the new growth, feeling reward orbs flow into him one by one. His magic perception sharpened. The golden glow of magic perception enhancement on his panel brightened. He grinned. The troll's catalytic effect on goldfish vine was huge. He could now harvest a batch every week. Though the crop had severe decay, each harvest still improved him. If this continued, promotion to platinum grade seemed only a matter of time. A thought flickered through his mind. If he could tame more trolls, the process would accelerate. Hagrid had said the previously tamed troll settlement was small. Across the Forbidden Forest, there might be 7 or 8 settlements and perhaps 50 trolls in total. If Char could tame them all, his goldfish vine yield might be 10 times larger. He almost had the impulse to search for troll traces again, but he dismissed it. Quirrell was still hunting unicorns in the Forbidden Forest. Taming many trolls would draw attention. Within Hogwarts, he had made Quirrell suffer a few times, but that was within the castle, where Quirrell was cautious. In the Forbidden Forest, Quirrell could act without constraint. Char did not delude himself into thinking he could truly contend with a professor in open conflict. Besides, trolls were ravenous. The current 3 adult trolls and 2 juveniles were as many as he and Hagrid could feed. Taming dozens would overwhelm Hogwarts' food stores. Better to wait until summer, when forest food was abundant, or to mass-produce some magical plant that could feed them. He shook his head and let those distracting thoughts go. He took a deep breath, cracked his knuckles, picked up his beater's bat, and walked toward the trolls. "Same as before," he croaked. "Come on." The trolls exchanged excited looks and charged, wooden clubs raised. Char didn't dodge. He planted his feet, veins standing out, and swung his bat with everything he had. Clubs met bat with bone-rattling impacts. Each collision sent the trolls stumbling backward. Char's arm ached from the recoil. On his system panel, his legendary life and legendary power glowed a fraction brighter with each collision. It was a tiny change, but it fueled him. During this plateau in his magical strength, he came here daily to temper those 2 legendary attributes. Progress was slow but real. He could see a path to mythical level, however difficult. "Again," he barked. "Again." He grappled with the trolls without pause. Each crash, each recoil, brightened his abilities a little more, like an iron being forged into steel through countless refinements. The low, thunderous impacts echoed through the Forbidden Forest and set birds to flight. They fought until the trolls were exhausted, and the thudding resumed the next day. Day after day, Char pushed forward toward mythical life and mythical power. Before he knew it, another week had passed. Chapter 130, Growth, Eve Price. Charles only realized how quickly time had flown when an owl arrived with a letter. Another week, already gone. He glanced at the system panel more out of habit than anything else. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth when he saw the change. Transfiguration was nearly bronze level now. Only a sliver remained. That was the result of a week spent constantly observing the magic of the shadow thorns and pestering Professor McGonagall for answers. Between Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration, Tollerman transformation, and McGonagall's methodical guidance, his understanding had deepened. With a little more practice, or by harvesting a few more batches of goldfish vine to boost his magic perception, advancing to bronze-level transfiguration would be well within reach. Once that happened, his charm system could expand quickly. He might even be able to learn new charms starting at bronze or silver instead of slogging up from black iron. That thought filled him with anticipation. At the same time, he couldn't help but feel a little disappointed as he looked at his other charms. The platinum-grade spells still glowed with a solid, unchanging sheen. His improved knowledge of magic at the microscopic level should have improved them as well, but they remained stalled. Charles sighed. The bottleneck wasn't his grasp of theory. It was, once again, insufficient magic perception. Harvest a few more goldfish vines and the situation might change. In the worst case, those charms might only jump with a qualitative leap once his magic perception itself reached platinum. Only then would everything snap into place. He stopped thinking in circles. With transfiguration as his current growth point, his magical level was clearly developing. The stalled charms could wait, foundations laid now for explosive growth later. He checked two other abilities on the panel, Legendary Power and Legendary Life. Their sheen had deepened slightly. It was a small change, but Charles felt it immediately in his body. The vitality, the raw power in his flesh and blood, both had increased enough that when he met a troll head-on, he barely retreated. The soreness and recoil were much milder. A warm surge of feeling swept through him. Even a slight improvement in legendary abilities made plain just how massive the leap to mythical level would be. It really was a different world. He ran through a few more calculations. The dragon egg should be hatching soon. When it did, he could try mass cultivating blood emeralds. The boost to hematopoiesis they offered might further change his two legendary abilities. Thoughts spun through his head before settling into calm. Only then did he open Cedric Diggory's letter. Charles, I know you're always frantic with work, but I still had to remind you, tomorrow's our match with Slytherin, remember? We've beaten Gryffindor and Ravenclaw. Win this one, and we're in the finals, one step from the Quidditch Cup. Hufflepuff hasn't reached the finals in years. We're making history. Cedric's handwriting was full of fire. Charles scratched his head awkwardly. If Cedric hadn't written, he, the team's tactical core, might well have forgotten the match. He took a breath and calmed himself. They had come this far. For Professor Sprout's sake, for the team, and for the little badgers who had supported them without reserve, he intended to win the cup. Not even fate would stop him. Decision made. No more work today. Consider it a holiday. He was going to Quidditch practice. When he returned to the castle, the degree to which everyone cared about tomorrow's semifinal became obvious. The little badgers were ecstatic. The moment their team reached the finals, it would break a decade-long drought. The excitement was like watching a national team get a real shot at the World Cup. Every little badger wore a gleaming animated badge, a badger clamped around a venomous snake about to devour it. Underneath the image, Hufflepuff eats snakes. The Slytherin fans, little snakes, were equally intense. Slytherin had already lost to Gryffindor. Another loss would knock them out of the finals for the first time in over a decade. No one wanted to be the reason their house ended up on that pillar of shame. That made their hostility toward Hufflepuff even sharper than it already was toward Gryffindor. Wherever students from the two houses crossed paths, the atmosphere crackled. Charles felt that tension personally. Every Slytherin who looked at him along the corridor did so with ice in their eyes. If not for the more than adequate public record of his power, some of them might have attempted a nasty curse before the match. As he neared Hufflepuff's Quidditch pitch, three familiar figures stepped up into his path: Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle. Charles frowned. "This is Hufflepuff territory," he said. "What are you doing here?" Malfoy mocked him. "Here to steal information, or are you hiding something?" His taunts turned red with anger. "You'll find out tomorrow. Your tricks won't work anymore. Victory belongs to Slytherin." Then, with Crabbe and Goyle at his side, Malfoy swaggered off. But he hadn't gone far before the memory of his recent defeats at Charles's hands flashed through his head. Malfoy stopped, turned back, and shouted, "Tomorrow, Slytherin will take more than your victory. That little greenhouse you got through connections, gone. You might even lose your aunt's job." Charles had started to walk away, but the words stopped him. Malfoy grinned maliciously when he saw he had Charles's attention. "Someone's already looking into how you got that greenhouse," he said. "You didn't meet the standards. Your aunt forced it through. The school board is investigating. Others will be implicated too. My father's on the board. Tomorrow he's bringing the review committee. Don't expect a good time." Slytherin's smugness in its purest form, Malfoy hurried off as if afraid Charles might make good on a threat. Crabbe and Goyle followed, still grinning. Charles's frown deepened. He hadn't known exactly why Professor Sprout had seemed so gloomy and angry that morning, why her office had been overflowing with dossiers, or why Professor McGonagall had looked tired lately with piles of similar material in her office. Now it all made sense. The review committee. The board's scrutiny extended to many professors, and Sprout and McGonagall had been buried in paperwork because of it. A cold flash of anger lit his eyes. He didn't care if they targeted him. Let them. But if they dragged Professor Sprout and the other professors he respected into this, if they made their lives miserable, Charles would not tolerate it. He stepped onto the Quidditch pitch, where his mood was obvious to everyone. Cedric jumped off his broom and came straight to him. "What's wrong, Charles?" Cedric asked. "Did those Slytherins do something?" Charles shook his head and told him what Malfoy had said. "I'm thinking how to get back at them," he added. Cedric's eyes lit up. "Like at the ministry hearing, give them a memory they'll never forget?" Charles nodded. Cedric's serious tone sharpened. "It's simple. Most of the board and Malfoy's circle will be at the match tomorrow. They won't miss Slytherin's game. In front of them, we make Slytherin look disgraceful. Not only do we make history, we pin them to the pillar of shame." Charles's eyes brightened. He had one more question. "One thing. Can you remind me of the rules? If the golden snitch isn't caught, does the game end?" Cedric blinked, then his eyes widened. "Merlin." "Charles, you aren't thinking," Charles grinned. "Who told them to start poking at Hufflepuff and our friends? Since they started it, they'd better be ready. The little badger's revenge will be unforgettable." Chapter 131, My Rules Are Above Yours. The next morning, a cold wind howled across the grounds, but it couldn't dampen the Quidditch fever inside the castle. Everywhere there were conversations about today's match, Hufflepuff versus Slytherin. With Ravenclaw tacitly conceding last place, this game might directly decide one of the finalists. The excitement was even greater than it had been for Gryffindor versus Slytherin. Early, crowds were already surging toward the Quidditch pitch. Only Dumbledore and a few of the deans remained in the castle, waiting for the school board and their review committee. The deans looked grim. They had spent over a week preparing review materials every day, and worst of all, the committee list had arrived only recently. Its composition surprised them. They had expected qualified herbology masters, respected names who could at least offer constructive academic feedback. Instead, the board had invited a group of critics. Snape's disgust was obvious. "These newspaper critics," he spat. "What do they even know? They write about whatever's fashionable, and after a few columns they act like authorities. Ask one of them to brew a potion, and what would you get? The little potion knowledge they had was probably handed back to Hogwarts when they graduated." He sneered. "If anyone dares to criticize my potions teaching, I'll turn them into a flobberworm and toss them in a cauldron." Even the other deans, rarely moved by Snape's bluster, agreed, especially Pomona Sprout. She had seen the name on the committee list and gone stone-faced. Porgy Chalman, a Slytherin alumnus notorious in the herbology world. His story was odd. Brilliant in herbology theory as a student, hopeless at practical work, plants would wither under his care. No one expected him to go far in practical herbology. Instead, he found a new path, popular herbology commentary. His articles were sharp, sarcastic, and full of scathing critiques of other herbologists. He became famous. Many readers hailed him as a true herbology master. If that were all, Sprout might have ignored him. But not long ago, just before the ministry hearing, Chalman had published a vicious piece attacking Charles' piranha algae cultivation method. Sprout had been too busy to respond at the time. Today, seeing his name on the review committee renewed her anger. "If that scoundrel dares slander Char again," she said, voice cold as iron, "I have a biting cabbage with his name on it." A chill ran down the spines of the deans and even Dumbledore. At that moment, several thestral-drawn carriages pulled up and stopped at the castle entrance. Lucius Malfoy and a group of school board members climbed from the carriages. Dumbledore moved to greet them, but voices from another carriage carried over, smooth, sarcastic, and condescending. "After all these years, Hogwarts hasn't changed a bit," one man sniffed. "Merlin's beard at least fixed the road from the castle to the station. And the outer walls, look at those stains. Where's the money gone?" A few well-dressed, eager middle-aged men stepped out, clearly delighted to be on a review panel. For them, being invited by the board was an honor and a chance to publish articles. Lucius even had one demand. "I invited you here for one purpose: find fault. Find fault, and damn well find fault. The more detailed your criticisms, the better. If you want, stay a week. The Malfoys will cover all your expenses. The promise put them into full fault-finding mode. They criticized the management and renovations, the operating model of Hogwarts, everything. Only when an even colder atmosphere cut through their chatter did they stop. Dumbledore regarded them mildly. "I thought you might be hungry, so I invited you to breakfast," he said. "It seems you've eaten enough. There's a Quidditch match today. If you have any opinions, please wait until after the game." Dumbledore's calm look shut them up. Lucius scowled at the critics. "Yes, find fault," he warned. "But don't aim to impeach Dumbledore. That's not what I asked. Know what kinds of faults are acceptable." The critics swallowed and agreed, eager to see the match. They followed Dumbledore toward the pitch. Lucius relaxed a little, though his attention was still split between the game and his hopes that the reviewers would create a fuss that kept Hogwarts occupied. When the reviewers took their seats in the front row, Porgy Chalman noticed Hufflepuff's banners and the Badgers Eat Snakes badges the Hufflepuffs wore. He smirked. "Hufflepuffs have always been mere participants," he said loud enough for some to hear. "I was on my Quidditch team for 7 years and never lost to Hufflepuff. Once I had an upset stomach and was clenching my butt on a broomstick, I still slammed a quaffle into their goal." The other reviewers laughed and nodded as Porgy continued to swagger. "I heard Hufflepuff recruited a first-year beater. What was her name? Sprout? Rowan? Something like that? When I played, I trounced teams like that. Slytherin will." He didn't finish. A spell struck him. The shock drained the color from his face. His hair began to fall out by the handful. Within moments, he was bald. Porgy sprang to his feet, pointing wildly in Pomona Sprout's direction. You? You dare attack me? I'm on the review panel, invited by the school board." Professor Sprout didn't flinch. Her wand rested like a blade at his throat. "Mention Charl in that tone one more time," she said evenly. "The next pruning charm won't stop at your hair. I mean what I say." Silence fell. Even the board members were hushed. The other critics became as mute as winter cicadas. They could feel the lethal calm in Sprout's voice. If Porgy pushed her again, there would be more than ruined hair. Fortunately, at that moment, Lee Jordan's whistle cut through the tension. "Time's up. Both teams are entering the field." The stands exploded in cheers. Sprout lowered her wand, her face relaxing into a proud smile, and she began to clap. Porgy slumped back into his seat, humiliated and furious. He clenched his fists, thinking only, "Slytherin, make them pay. Beat them to bits. And when I judge herbology, especially in that little greenhouse, Pomona Sprout, you'll see." Charl emerged from the Hufflepuff tunnel and immediately looked toward Sprout's stand. He read the indignation in her expression and saw the bald man nearby. He knew at once who had crossed her. His gaze hardened. Porgy Chalman had just signed his own death warrant. A squeeze in Charles' hand pulled his attention back to the pitch. It was time for the pre-match handshake. Marcus Flint, Slytherin's captain, was a dirty player with a reputation for crushing opponents' hands during handshakes. He gripped Charles' hand like he meant to warn him. No matter how hard Flint squeezed, it felt like he was trying to squeeze a mountain. Charles looked down at the hand in his palm casually. "Had enough?" he asked. "If not, I'll show you how it's done. If you want someone to hurt, that's not how you do it." Then Charles' 5 fingers closed around Flint's hand. Flint felt as if some prehistoric beast had bitten his palm. 5 bright red crescent marks appeared. He let go so fast he looked stunned and pale. He glared at Charles with a mixture of anger and fear, then carried a small box to the Slytherin bench. Every Slytherin player had a similar box. The spectators murmured, "What are those boxes?" Draco and the other Slytherin students wore smug smiles. "Just watch," they said. "When those boxes open, Hufflepuff will be finished." The Hufflepuffs eyed the boxes nervously. Were they some concealed curse? Slytherin's reputation made such thoughts plausible. Then the boxes opened. Inside, thanks to an undetectable extension charm, were gleaming suits of armor. As soon as the lids lifted, the armor seemed to come alive and automatically donned itself onto the Slytherin players. Pandemonium erupted. Lee Jordan blew his whistle. "Foul! That's a foul!" The Slytherins laughed. "A foul? Which rule did we break? There's no rule against armor. We wore our team uniforms when we entered the field." Madam Hooch, broom instructor and rules authority, flipped through a thick book of Quidditch regulations. After scanning it, she sighed and raised her hand. The rules don't forbid wearing armor. At most, they're exploiting a loophole. It's not a foul. The Hufflepuff stands seethed. It's not fair, they cried. Slytherin retorted, using the rules smartly. What's unfair about that? Whose fault is it you didn't think of it? As the argument swelled, a booming voice echoed from the armor itself. Now, the bludgers pose no threat to us. Without the danger of bludgers, can your playing style still win? To the Slytherin's surprise, the Hufflepuff team didn't look intimidated. Cedric Diggory shrugged, gaze steady. We were debating whether this would be too much, he said aloud. Luckily, you made our decision for us. Don't blame us. The Slytherins were baffled. They hadn't expected that confidence. The start whistle blew. The Slytherins, though their armor had weight-reducing charms, were noticeably slower. Hufflepuff had already settled into formation, circling Charles as they flew toward the first bludger. Slytherin was ready to mock that this meant the bludger would be useless against them. But the next second, Charles swung his beater bat with brutal precision. The bludger he struck did not fly toward Slytherin. It rocketed like a cannonball into Hufflepuff's goalpost. There was a piercing screech of splintering wood. Hufflepuff's goal shattered. The entire stadium froze. The Slytherins who had been smug went silent. Foul! How can you destroy your own goal? That's completely unfair, someone shouted. Madam Hooch blew time out and checked the rulebook again. The rules don't say you can't use a bludger to smash your own goal, she announced finally. Since there's no rule against it, play continues. On the Slytherin side, players stared at the empty goal in shock. How could the match go on? Charles weighed his bat in his hand and said with a lazy smile, Looks like our rules are above yours now, isn't it? Everyone, ready? This match might run a little long. Chapter 132, Did I Permit You to Ascend? Making History. Boom. The sound of the goal breaking echoed across the pitch. The Slytherin players froze as if they'd seen a ghost. Anyone who had played Quidditch long enough knew how solid those goal hoops were, designed to take repeated hits to withstand bludgers smashing into them. Over the years, bludgers had pounded those goals countless times, yet they had never shown real damage. Until now. A bludger struck by Ciel had shattered a goal cleanly. The Slytherins stared at the ruin in disbelief. What kind of force was that? Their confidence in their protective armor crumbled just as quickly. The armor had been crafted specifically to defend against blows like those Ciel had landed in their previous match. Back then, his hits had been powerful, but not earth-shattering. Why had his strength increased so drastically now? Their faces fell as realization dawned. Every team member clenched their teeth. He didn't use his full power last time, someone muttered. He tricked us. Cunning little. Using tricks. Ciel ignored their shouts. His eyes flicked to the system panel. When he saw the ticks for legendary life and legendary strength, satisfaction warmed his features. The time he'd spent training with trolls had not been wasted. By taking just a few steps along the path toward mythical level, his strength and physique had improved dramatically. Before, he might have been able to smash a goal by pushing himself to the limit, but never with this kind of clean, decisive force. If he kept getting stronger, if he reached mythical level, the power of the mythical titans could tear sky and earth apart. At that point, most magic below mythical level would be insignificant. While such thoughts flickered through Ciel's mind, Madam Hooch blew her whistle to restart the match. The Hufflepuffs rose back into the sky. Cedric gestured to Flint and the rest of the Slytherin side. Up, he called. Do you want to be the first Slytherin team in over a decade not to make the finals? Those words sparked the team's remaining pride. They gritted their teeth. We can't let this happen. There's still a chance. If we catch the snitch before Hufflepuff gets too far ahead, then we can still win. No goals to defend? Fine, we'll hunt the snitch. They lifted themselves higher, abandoning the quaffle to search for the golden snitch. Ciel and Cedric both watched with knowing expressions. Slytherin's long history of Quidditch dominance wasn't all refereeing bias. There was genuine skill. Their reaction was quick, tactical. But Ciel's face stayed unreadable. He swung his beater's bat. A new bludger shot out in a sharp arc like a cannonball. Did I permit you to ascend? Shire called, and the air itself seemed to howl as the bludger barreled toward the clustered Slytherins. 5 of them felt the blast like a physical thing. Even through armor, they felt their scalps tingle. Was this really just a bludger struck by a human? Even a giant's hit wouldn't be this fierce. Flint pointed at one of the beaters. "You hit it back." The beater's eyes widened. "Me? Hit this? Isn't that what a beater does?" Flint snapped. "Don't chicken out, and your armor's enchanted. It'll hold. If you can stop it even for a second, you'll be the match winner." Forced by the captain's words, the beater gripped his bat and flew up to meet the incoming bludger. He swung, shouting, and then the bat splintered on impact. The bludger exploded into shards under the force. A concussion slammed into him. If not for the armor's protective spells, he'd have been a bloody mess. Even so, the armor cracked like thin veneer, his shoulder tore with agonizing pain, and his vision went gray. He spun out of control and fell, sent straight to the infirmary. The remaining Slytherins exchanged terrified looks. He just tried and died, one thought. What could they do now? Flint looked at the second beater. "You go?" Before he could finish, the beater glared and tossed his bat back. "You go. You're the captain. Show us how much of a man you are." "I'm a chaser," Flint protested. "This is your job." "Goal's gone. What good are chasers now?" the beater sneered. "If you're so proud, take the bat." They argued, voices rising into a scandalized squeal. Cowardice and stubbornness flared. Finally, Flint clenched his jaw, took the bat, and forced himself upward. Shire struck again. Another bludger screamed toward him. Flint felt the pressure of the wind and dropped altitude before his bat even touched the ball. Time and again, he tried to climb. Time and again, Shire's bludgers met them precisely, forcing them down within seconds. Those who failed to dodge were knocked off and carted to the infirmary the same way the first beater had been. Soon only 5 Slytherin players remained in the air. Under Shire's relentless suppression, they could not maintain height. It was as if an invisible wall separated them from the sky. Meanwhile, Hufflepuff kept scoring with the quaffle, pelting Slytherin's ruined goal again and again. The scoreboard ticked and ticked. The remaining Slytherin players could do nothing but watch their lead evaporate. When the score hit 150-0, the spectators realized the match was effectively over. Even if Slytherin caught the snitch, they could no longer make up the difference. Besides, they couldn't get high enough to hunt the snitch at all. All eyes turned to Cedric Diggory, the Hufflepuff seeker. If he caught the snitch, the game would end, but he made no move. He coasted on his broom, performing neat, showy maneuvers as if savoring the moment. He didn't seem in any hurry. A thought rippled through the crowd. Hufflepuff didn't want the match to end just yet. They were piling on points, chasing a humiliating record. Lee Jordan's voice trembled in the commentary box. The largest score difference in Hogwarts Quidditch history was 127 years ago, Slytherin versus Hufflepuff. Back then, several Hufflepuff players were ill and had no substitutes, and Slytherin won 570-30, a difference of 540. No match has come close to that since. Not even a 500-point margin. He swallowed audibly. At this rate, Hufflepuff could break that century-old record, create a whole new record. The biggest margin ever, and a shutout. No team has ever achieved that in 1,000 years. Hufflepuff supporters in the stands began to chant the advancing tally in sync, voices growing louder with each score. 220, 230, Slytherin's stands went silent. Draco Malfoy, once smug, was now pale. Many Slytherin supporters couldn't stay to watch their house humiliated and left the stands, slumping their banners like discarded flags. Members of the Board of Governors and the judging panel looked grim. Most of them had been Slytherins in their day and had expected an easy victory. This was a massacre instead. Dumbledore and the others sat frozen, unable to tear their eyes away. The Hufflepuff counting swelled across the stadium. 520. 530. When the quaffle tore through the net again and the score widened to 540-0, the Hufflepuff's cheers felt like they might tear the castle apart. Then Cedric signaled and flew out. In less than 3 seconds, he closed on the snitch with brilliant speed and snapped it into his fist. Lee Jordan's voice cracked with excitement. "The golden snitch has been caught. The match is over." He paused, almost lost for breath. "The final score is 690-0. The largest score difference in Hogwarts Quidditch Cup history in 1,000 years, and the only shutout ever paired with such a margin. Hufflepuff has set a record for Hogwarts Quidditch today. The remaining Slytherin players exhaled, relief washing over them like a weight lifted. But Hufflepuff paid them no mind. Their players grouped with Ciel and circled the tower 3 times in formation, repeating Ciel's celebratory gesture. Cedric whooped and shouted like a man who'd never be so happy again. In the stands, Professor Sprout's scowl had vanished, replaced with a face of fierce pride. She turned to the previously smug, rude Bogey Charmin and couldn't help but sneer. "What did you say before?" she asked, triumphant. "You said you could beat Hufflepuff even with poop. Say that again." She looked at Ciel with undisguised admiration. "My Gier, he'll beat the poop right out of you." Chapter 133. Master? Clown. Hang him up and beat him. Bogey Chalman's face went from green to white. He was about to retort to Professor Sprout when a cold stare from above stopped him. He looked up and saw Ciel, bat in hand, watching him as if ready to strike. Bogey's mind flashed back to the last match. This Sprout boy had smashed a goalpost. If Ciel attacked him and he had no armor, he'd be ripped to pieces. The retort died on his tongue. He swallowed it and ground his teeth instead. Dumbledore, however, began to clap, eyes shining with emotion. "What a wonderful match," he said. "I never expected to witness something so historic today. They all played exceptionally." The governors on the school board looked grim. They felt as if they'd just arrived at Hogwarts and been given a cold reception. They wanted to regain control. One of them said curtly, "This was an impressive display, but Headmaster Dumbledore, we're here to evaluate Hogwarts academically, not to watch Quidditch," another added. "Let's get down to business." Dumbledore only smiled and nodded. "Of course. Where shall we start?" Bogey's smile was predatory. "That Ciel Sprout is a remarkable young wizard," he said, drawing the attention of the other board members. "Not just in Quidditch. I hear he's unique in herbology as well, using the little greenhouse. Shall we open our eyes?" Dumbledore glanced at Professor Sprout. To everyone's relief, she did not explode. She sneered instead. "Then I will open your eyes," she said coolly. "Let's see how a true herbology master performs." Those words hit a sore spot. Herbology master had always been a dagger for Bogey Chalman. If only he had that distinction, he might have pursued herbology instead of becoming a critic, constantly attacking new practitioners. His face went ashen, and he forced out, "I'll be waiting to see it," then strode toward the little greenhouse. Dumbledore watched him go, then turned to Ciel and casually flicked his wrist. Lines of glowing text appeared in the air before Ciel. "Ciel, the review board would like you to come to the little greenhouse." Ciel frowned, a chill settling in his eyes. Cedric and the others, still buzzing from the Quidditch victory, saw the message too. Cedric looked at Ciel in surprise. "Ciel, what's this about the review board?" After Ciel explained briefly, the celebration drained from them and was replaced by anger. "What? That's outrageous," someone spat. "First a hearing, and now this review board? Do they think they can bully our house?" Cedric clapped Ciel on the shoulder. "Don't worry. The house never lets someone fight alone. I'll gather everyone." Ciel was flattered but shook his head. "Thanks, Cedric, but no. We already made a big fuss at the hearing. Another one won't help. We'll look like troublemakers. Besides, you're going places. Prefect, head boy, maybe the ministry after graduation. Don't burn bridges for me." Cedric hesitated, but Ciel's calm confidence reassured him. "This is Hogwarts, with Dumbledore in charge," Ciel said. "If those review boards want to misrepresent things, they can't do it right under his eye." Reluctantly, Cedric accepted that and agreed to stand by if needed. At the little greenhouse entrance, the review board had already gathered. Professor Sprout adopted a professional tone, despite her disdain for the board. "This is the little greenhouse. It was closed for a long time due to funding and the tumultuous period we all know about. We've restored the soil, added nutrients and perlite to return it to its former state." Bogey interrupted with feigned curiosity. "Why perlite?" "It doesn't restore nutrients much better than diatomaceous earth, and it's at least 10 times the price. Why not use more diatomaceous earth?" Professor Sprout looked at him as if he were foolish. "Perlite has always been used in the little greenhouse. In soil of the same composition, magic distributes more evenly. Other mixes can cause magical discontinuities and permanently damage the greenhouse. Bogey beamed. I found a secret recipe in a book. Mix a special potion into diatomaceous earth, and you get soil more potent than perlite. Even with potion costs, it's only a third of the price. Professor, you surely don't mean you've never heard of my recipe? Sprout's patience thinned. A fusion potion might be theoretically possible, but it's been discarded in practice. It has fatal flaws. Bogey jumped in again. Theory implies there's a way. Why not try? Oh, and I know a few other secret recipes. Also some suggestions on the Humping Willow project you've been working on for years without results. I could guide you. The tirade continued until Sprout realized she was wasting breath. Explaining to someone who hadn't cultivated a magical plant in decades and who loved public criticism was pointless. Bogey, however, mistook her silence for victory. He pulled out a quill and parchment. If you don't understand, I'll teach you. These are the books I read. Study them. Also, this little greenhouse won't do as it is. We should use diatomaceous earth, expand the greenhouse several times, and implement my modifications. Professor Sprout's face tightened. The Humping Willow project and the little greenhouse were her life's work. She would not let an ignorant academic provocateur lecture her. Her anger made her lips tremble and her legs sway. Twice she almost fell. A strong arm steadied her. Ciel had arrived. He looked at Bogey Chalman with cold, hard eyes. Anger rose in him. This man had bullied Aunt Sprout, not just now but during the match too. Ciel helped Sprout to the side and spoke levelly, but with unmistakable steel. Auntie, your work is renowned. You are a recognized master of herbology, he said. Having an amateur who's merely popular with readers call himself a master and debate academic matters is like a transfiguration tutor arguing with a first year. After lots of bluster, the first year declares, "Old transfiguration methods are worthless. I learned a better way from a joke column in the Daily Prophet. True masters don't brag in jokes. A real master wouldn't care about showmanship, only clowns do." There was a stunned silence, then suppressed laughter. Even Lucius Malfoy snorted. Professor Sprout's color returned. She steadied herself. Bogey's face, however, flushed crimson. "What did you say? Who's the clown?" he snarled. Ciel shrugged. "Whoever loses their temper like that, would a real master care about jokes? Only clowns do." Fuming, Bogey turned on Dumbledore. "Headmaster, are these the sorts of students Hogwarts is raising? They don't respect people anymore. Aren't you going to do something?" Dumbledore raised an eyebrow. "Chalman, are you speaking to me about headmastering?" Bogey's hot words caught in his throat. Dumbledore's mild rebuke felt like a bucket of cold water. He stammered. "No, not. I mean the student's character is problematic and must be managed." Dumbledore cut him off. "What's problematic?" "I find Hogwarts students of admirable character, Ciel included. If there's criticism to be made, perhaps it's not his failing." "Now, weren't you here to evaluate? Get on with it." Bogey clenched his fists and forced a laugh. He glared at the greenhouse. He would find flaws, 100 if necessary, and write them all up to shame Professor Sprout and Ciel. He was determined to strip them of ownership and reputation. As the group prepared to enter, Ciel held up a hand. "Since this master knows so much about herbology," he said, voice cool, "perhaps a crowd standing around would interfere with his judgment. Why not let him inspect the greenhouse alone? Let him dig 3 feet if he wishes." Bogey's heart leapt. Alone, with no one to temper his report, he could say whatever he pleased. He still hesitated. What if there were dangerous plants? But Ciel stepped forward and threw the greenhouse doors wide open so everyone could peer in. "It has only recently resumed operation," Ciel explained. "My skills are limited, so I haven't planted anything showy, just a pair of guardian trees, a few newly planted devil's snares, and some clumps of freshly set shadow thorns. Bogey Master should have no trouble." Inside, Bogey saw what Ciel described. The guardian trees were harmless enough. Devil's Snare was dangerous in theory, but straightforward to deal with if you knew its weakness. The shadow thorns were the only slightly worrying items, but they'd been newly planted. What could they possibly do? Bogey stepped forward eagerly, determined to begin his inspection. Ciel made a small, almost casual gesture toward the clump of shadow thorns mixed in with ordinary plants and said quietly, "Go ahead." Then, abruptly, Ciel shut the greenhouse door. From within came a sudden, fierce chorus, low, plant-like voices that seemed to rustle with malice. "Hang him up and beat him," they hissed. "Beat him to death." The door thudded shut. Chapter 134, Two Variants, The Potential for Legend. When the little greenhouse door swung shut, Bogey Chalman flinched, then heard Char's voice faintly from outside. "Professor Bogey, maintaining a greenhouse eats up resources," Char said. "Leaving the door open is wasteful, so I closed it. If you can't handle the devil's snare and shadow thorns inside, just shout and I'll open it to help you." Bogey scoffed. Char shutting the door had to be a cheap scare, meant to make him rush out. Ridiculous. He saw through it entirely. His face slid into a smug expression. This would be perfect material for his next article. He'd tear the little greenhouse apart in print, praise the readers with his wisdom, and maybe ride Professor Sprout's name to more academic fame. The Herbology Association's so-called geniuses. He should be the professor, not they. "No need," he declared loudly. "How could I not handle mere devil's snare and shadow thorns?" He looked at the plants in the soil with practiced confidence. They're both light-fearing, and these are only freshly planted. Easy. But beneath the confidence was a flash of jealousy. He'd tried and failed to cultivate those very plants himself. That failure had always stung whenever young herbologists succeeded. He'd lash out in criticism to soothe his ego. Now Char had them thriving in his first year, and had mocked him earlier. Bogey's irritation sharpened into anger. Maybe he shouldn't use Lumos to drive them back. Maybe he'd use a fire-making charm instead. He didn't get the chance to act on the thought. Shadows on the ground began to writhe. One of them shot up like a living thing and snapped around the wand in Bogey's hand. The aspen wand, with its flashy gold inlay, shattered with a crisp snap. Bogey, who'd lived soft and mostly wielded a pen, froze. Then Devil's Snare roots wound around him. They constricted with terrifying force, squeezing like enormous pythons. He could hardly breathe. His bones seemed about to crush. A few stunned seconds passed before Bogey realized this wasn't ordinary herb behavior. The shadow that had crushed his wand, what was it? The Devil's Snare's strength at this stage was wrong. Something else was at work. Variants. The thought hit him. These are variant forms, stronger than ordinary Devil's Snare, and that shadow is a variant too. Before he could think further, Shadowthorn's roots slithered in. Their roots bristled with cruel barbs. The sight made Bogey's face go white. Wounds from Shadowthorns were notoriously slow and agonizing to heal. If he was pricked by even one of those thorns, recovery could take a year, or worse. "No, help," he tried to shout. Devil's Snare roots sealed his mouth before his words could carry, leaving only muffled whimpers. The shadow wriggled and wove the snare roots and thorn roots into a long, barbed whip. It lashed him mercilessly. He howled, each cry stifled by the constricting plants. Inside the greenhouse, his screams were cut into a string of miserable, choked sounds. Outside, the school board and the review committee exchanged glances. "Did you hear that? Is that a scream?" Char, bright and untroubled, shook his head. "A scream? There are only a few Devil's Snare and Shadow Thorns in there. They're newly planted, weak and helpless. What could possibly make Professor Bogey scream?" He smiled suddenly, covering his intent. Maybe he's rehearsing a safety drill, testing the greenhouse. He could be talking loudly to himself, thinking out loud. We shouldn't disturb him. His explanation swayed the uncertain faces. It sounded reasonable. Bogey was an authority. He wasn't going to be undone by seedlings. Only Dumbledore and Professor Sprout looked uneasy. Dumbledore's eyes lingered on Char with a thoughtful expression. That child never involved himself unnecessarily, but when his family or friends were touched, he could be ruthless. It wasn't a bad thing. If the wizarding world ever faced a great threat, the loyalties Char was forming now meant he might not stand idle. Sprout's reaction was simpler and warmer, proud and amused. Char had managed to make Bogey suffer a little lesson. Clever and brave. Inside the greenhouse, distant, like someone pounding at a door, a faint sound came. Bogey, blood-streaked, staggered to the door, holding an alchemically made flint, one he'd bought to impress others, the kind that sparks a flame with a finger slide. Somehow, by a sliver of luck, he'd freed himself from the Devil's Snare's grip long enough to batter on the door. "Help! Let me out, quickly! Let me out!" he yelled. The committee could no longer sit on their hands. Faces went pale. It's Bogey. He's knocking. He's really calling for help. Char feigned surprise with theatrical perfection. Impossible. Professor Bogey can't be defeated by something so small. Maybe he's performing a safety exercise, acting this out himself. How convincing. So knowledgeable and such a fine actor. Virtuous and artistic, indeed. He was buying time. Inside, the shadow plant, stung and vindictive at being forced off, lashed again. The thorned whip cracked across Bogey's body 3 more times. He went slurry-visioned, collapsed, and fell unconscious. Dumbledore cleared his throat and looked pointedly at Char. Char? Professor Bogey's safety drill seems concluded. He has likely finished his review. You should open the door now. Char nodded with exaggerated regret, thinking what a pity he'd been this close to teaching Bogey a truly severe lesson. The door opened slowly. Bogey was flung out, entangled in the thorny whip, dragging a trail of blood as he rolled across the ground. Shock rippled through the onlookers. School board members, the review committee, Professor McGonagall, Professor Flitwick. None of them had expected this sight. Snape's expression, however, was a tight, knowing curl of satisfaction. He'd guessed something like this might happen. He understood Char better than most. This boy wasn't merely brave. He held grudges and had a cunning streak unusual for Gryffindor. Bogey had insulted Professor Sprout and had wandered into Char's domain. He'd been asking for trouble. But Snape's curiosity had another edge. As a potions master who worked with many magical herbs, he'd used Devil's Snare and Shadow Thorns in preparations and knew their usual limitations. How could such immature specimens inflict such devastating damage? Bogey, ignorant though he might be, couldn't be unaware of their basic weaknesses, unless something else was different. Snape's eyes snapped to the plants that had slithered back into the greenhouse. His breath hitched. This Devil's Snare and these Shadow Thorns, mutated subspecies, he said under his breath. His pupils narrowed. The significance hit him like a curse. Independently cultivating a mutated subspecies of a magical plant was a tremendous academic achievement, on par with a major breakthrough in potion making. It would mean top-tier journal publications, new research avenues, a paradigmatic shift in the field. And if he wasn't mistaken, Char had already cultivated mutated piranha algae earlier. 3 independently cultivated mutated subspecies in roughly half a year at school? Even Snape, who'd grown used to geniuses and was himself one of the century's few great potion minds, was stunned. Professor Sprout had not deceived him. Char, he had the makings, perhaps, of legend. Chapter 135, Talent Surpassing the Dark Lord, Punish Me As You Please. Severus was still reeling from his own realization when the members of the Board of Governors and the judging panel rushed to check on Bogey Chalman. The herbology professor lay badly wounded by shadow thorns, bleeding and groaning on the greenhouse floor. He's alive, one judge announced, voice shaky. But barely. Covered in thorn wounds, another whispered. It'll take a year for a full recovery. He won't be writing any papers this year. At that, Professor Pomona Sprout, Shia Sprout's guardian in herbology, made a face as if she had just lost something precious. What a shame, she said, and immediately added, not that you should misunderstand me. I was thinking of Bogey's articles. Who will I read on the toilet now? The herbology world will be so much duller. Her flippant tone set the board off like a match to tinder. You did this on purpose, one of them barked. This was a setup, malicious, insidious. I'm expelling you, another shouted. Professor Sprout, already furious, produced a potted biting cabbage and hurled it at the nearest board member. A flash of protective magic intercepted the pot midair. The biting cabbage snapped ineffectually at empty space, visibly enraged. Pomona, Dumbledore said, voice weary, the protective charm still shimmering. Please. My child is about to be expelled, Sprout snapped. Can't I show some temper? Dumbledore forced a strained smile. To expel a student, the headmaster must sign off. We have our procedures. Reluctantly, Sprout snapped the pot shut and put it away, but she made no effort to hide her contempt from the governors and judges. You saw the state of the little greenhouse, she said coldly. You have no authority to judge this. From now on, the little greenhouse does not welcome you. My herbology classes do not need evaluations from people who know nothing about plants. The governor's faces hardened. First the Quidditch scandal, now this public humiliation. How could they let their dignity be trodden on? One member straightened and spoke. voice low and dangerous. Dumbledore, you shield them too much. Remember, the board retains certain powers. If we all vote unanimously, we can initiate an expulsion hearing, even if you oppose it. We have one chance each year. We didn't want to interfere before, but this time, he let the threat hang in the air. Everyone looked toward Lucius Malfoy, waiting for him to take a stand for the board. Lucius, who'd come in with a petty mission to make trouble for Hogwarts, suddenly found himself in a trap. If he supported expulsion, he'd alienate Dumbledore and Professor Sprout. If he didn't, he'd betray the governors and risk political and business fallout. He hesitated, stuck between duty and self-interest. Severus Snape laughed, a bitter, sudden sound that cut through the tension. "You fools," he said, looking at them with undisguised contempt. "Expel Ciel Sprout? Have you even opened a magic textbook in your lives? Are your minds only full of galleons and titles? Do you not see that the Devil's Snare and Shadow Thorns in that greenhouse are mutated subspecies?" The governors blinked, searching memory for the term. Slytherin's snakes of ambition didn't often admit ignorance, but someone managed a halting question. Mutated subspecies, you mean not cultivated by usual methods? Forms that differ from the originals? Severus's eyes glittered. Yes. Tell me, what is the significance of a student independently cultivating 3 excellent mutated subspecies within 6 months? Have you any idea? You may proceed with your expulsion if you wish, but understand this, there is precedent for disastrous consequences. He invoked a name that made the room go cold. Have you forgotten Durmstrang? A century ago, they expelled a student, Grindelwald. He swept through the European magical world afterwards. Those who expelled him paid dearly. A hush fell. The mention of Grindelwald, of the Nurmengard prison, and the carnage that followed his rise reached every one of them. Faces drained of color. Even Lucius looked at Ciel with stunned horror. Severus continued, voice dark and certain. "I'm not saying Ciel is exactly like Grindelwald. I'm saying Ciel's talent, especially in herbology, might be of a magnitude you do not understand. Finding one person who can produce 3 independent, excellent mutations in half a year is rarer than most of you can imagine. If you expel such a handful of talent, you may be setting things in motion you cannot stop." No one wanted to test that fate. The board members, who had been bold and theatrical a moment before, suddenly found excuses. One swayed and said, apologetic and absurd, "I'm sorry, I'm unwell. I forgot my medicine this morning. I must have had a dizzy spell." He fumbled a small bottle from his pocket, drank, and the faint scent of whiskey betrayed him. Dumbledore, masterful at reading faces, stepped forward with concern. "Take care of your health," he said, genuine. Others echoed the sentiment, praising the headmaster and making small talk about worry and age until the atmosphere warmed and the dispute cooled. Only when eyes drifted back to Bogey Chalman did Dumbledore's expression harden with responsibility. He acknowledged that Bogey had been careless. He also held Ciel accountable, however, for failing to assess the risks, for neglecting calls for help, and for planting dangerous species without approval. "There must be consequences," he said. For the governors, that was exactly the graceful exit they wanted, not an expulsion that would escalate, but a public reprimand that saved face. Professor Sprout protested on Ciel's behalf, but Dumbledore remained firm. "Pomona, I have been lenient with Ciel. If something worse had happened today, we must sometimes punish to educate." He turned to Ciel, voice cold and formal. "Ciel Sprout, you will be confined to the little greenhouse for the next week. Except for food and water delivered by a house elf, you are not to leave." Ciel's mind raced. A week in the greenhouse, planting, experimenting, reading, this could hardly be called punishment. He tried to look indignant. "Principal, a week." Dumbledore raised an eyebrow. "Not fair? Compared to your negligence, a week does seem inadequate. 2 weeks. Ciel's protest died before it could form. 2 weeks? Principal. Dumbledore's hand slammed the table for emphasis. 3 weeks, and at the end of term, you will patrol the Forbidden Forest as part of your discipline. If your attitude does not improve, further consequences will follow." The boastful defiance fled from Ciel's face in an instant. He sagged halfway to the floor, hands over his face, voice shaking. "Understood, Principal. I won't be careless again. 3 weeks it is." The governors, Lucius included, regarded the punishment as suitably severe, stern enough to be politically useful, yet not so brutal as to risk unpredictable consequences. They took their leave, satisfied enough to move on. Lucius lingered a step behind the others. He watched Ciel through narrowed, calculating eyes. The boy had been frightened by the idea of the Forbidden Forest patrol, understandably so, but Severus's earlier assessment had lodged in Lucius's mind. Ciel might become extraordinary. Opportunity and instinct tugged at him. He had come with a gift meant to smooth tensions. Now it could serve as a bargaining chip. Lucius drew a piece of parchment from his robes and stepped forward. "Do not be afraid, young Mr. Sprout," he said in a voice that was both patronizing and oddly solicitous. "The Forbidden Forest is dangerous. If you learn this charm, you will have less to fear. This is a collection unique to House Malfoy. If ever you wish to consult antiquated or rare texts, the House of Malfoy will be glad to assist." With that, he left the greenhouse. Ciel let his hand fall from his face, a smile threatening the corners of his mouth. To be confined for 3 weeks in the little greenhouse and then to patrol the Forbidden Forest, both looked to him like opportunities rather than punishments. He picked up the parchment Lucius had offered, and, when he saw the writing and diagrams, his eyes widened. A soft sound escaped him. "This is Chapter 136, Oolong Chudong. Only Tedium leads to progress." Char's gaze dropped to the parchment. One spell leaped out at him at once. "Serpensortia," he murmured. Or Oolong Chudong? Seeing the name made him recall the dueling club scene from the original story, back in their second year, when Draco Malfoy had dueled Harry and produced a huge black snake. The spell sent a massive serpent rearing up to strike. If Harry hadn't been a Parselmouth, that spell would have been terrifying for a second-year wizard to face. Char's eyes flashed with interest and something like unease. He hadn't expected to come across this spell, part of the Malfoy collection, even before Draco himself had learned it. Professor Sprout, watching him, asked with concern, "Char, what did Lucius Malfoy give you? That sort of thing isn't always wholesome." Char didn't try to hide it. He handed over the parchment that recorded Oolong Chudong. "Professor," he said plainly. Pomona Sprout scanned the page and frowned. "This is called Oolong Chudong? It summons venomous snakes?" "It counts as introductory level dark magic, doesn't it?" she said. "Char, in my opinion, you should wait at least until your second year before learning." Her words stopped when another voice cut in, surprising everyone in the room. "Pomona, I don't think you need to be so cautious," Dumbledore said. Sprout's head snapped toward him, incredulous. Dumbledore smiled gently. "Oolong Chudong, I know it," he said. "Because of its aggressive nature, it is regarded as an introductory dark arts spell. Yes, but it does not actually rely on violent emotion. It is, essentially, a classic transfiguration example. I think this is the right time for Char to learn it." He added with a twinkle, "Besides, if Char actually intended to harm someone, he'd find a baseball bat rather more effective than a wand." Sprout visibly relaxed and handed the parchment back to Char. He kept the page, feeling oddly bemused. He had never been particularly fascinated by Oolong Chudong. After all, as Dumbledore pointed out, his own physical strength would handle most ordinary opponents, and he had Sectum Sempra as a trump card. Still, Dumbledore's endorsement made him pause. If the headmaster thought the spell was valuable for transfiguration training, then perhaps it was more than a mere snake-summoning trick. Char's mind spun through possibilities. In the original story, Malfoy's repertoire contained many unique or unusual spells, some not seen in other hands. Lucius Malfoy, head of a powerful family and a core Death Eater, would surely have selected his son's materiel carefully. If Oolong Chudong were insignificant, why would Lucius present it so deliberately? Char remembered the duel at the Ministry between Dumbledore and Voldemort, the rare, direct clash. Voldemort had used venomous snakes in a devastating way. Could that have been an extreme application of Oolong Chudong? In Voldemort's hands, perhaps the spell could be pushed far beyond its ordinary limits. No verbal incantation needed, and summoning not a single snake, but hundreds, even thousands. If so, could Lucius have once obtained such a spell from Voldemort and kept it in the Malfoy collection? There weren't many snake-oriented spells in the magical world, and the Malfoys weren't the type to favor ugly, slithering things for no reason. The thought gave Char a chill. Perhaps Lucius's choice to present the parchment here had a hidden meaning. The Malfoys had always managed to survive political upheavals on both sides of the struggle, and that required a certain cunning. The flurry of theories died down as Char forced himself back to a calmer perspective. Whatever currents flowed beneath the academic review, they didn't involve him. He was a first-year student. Unless someone harmed his plants or threatened Professor Sprout, the larger schemes had nothing to do with him. His place was simple: tend the crops and practice his magic. Dumbledore raised his wand, and an invisible field slipped into place around the little greenhouse. "All right," he said, "until this protection fades, nothing may enter or leave except for food, water, and whatever resources the greenhouse needs to function. Char, you may remain inside to serve your detention." Char felt an unexpected wash of relief. With Dumbledore's enchantment, the little greenhouse was as safe as any place in Hogwarts. He no longer needed to worry about threats from outside. As for the boredom of being confined, he smiled. "Boredom and tedium," he said softly to himself, "are my greatest allies. Boredom lets you focus on one thing. Tedium means striving for perfection through endless repetition. If you want to improve, they are the best companions." Without hesitation, he stepped into the protected greenhouse. The door closed. The outside world was cut off. Only him and the plants remained. The agitation from earlier events dissolved into complete calm. He set himself down and turned his attention back to the parchment. The description of Oolong Chudong lay open before him. His face moved through concentration, sometimes frowning, sometimes relaxed, as his wand twitched almost instinctively while he read. He let the spell's structure, its gestures and intent sink in. Outside matters had become utterly irrelevant. On the system panel, subtle and faint, the words Oolong Chudong began to appear. Chapter 137, Interests, Undercurrents, and Secrets. While Ciel was absorbed in the little greenhouse, the news from there had already reached the castle. The students had barely finished celebrating their Quidditch triumph when word spread that Ciel would be confined to the castle for 3 weeks because Bogey Chalman had been seriously injured in the greenhouse. Hufflepuff erupted in outrage. "How can this be? What does this have to do with Ciel? I've heard of Bogey Chalman. He's always making a fuss in the herbology column. He can't even handle the plants in the greenhouse and he gets hurt, and Ciel has to be confined. This is ridiculous. Who made this decision?" Then they heard that Dumbledore himself had ordered the confinement, that the confinement charms were set by Dumbledore personally, and that even Professor Sprout couldn't overturn it. The atmosphere in Hufflepuff collapsed. Cedric clenched his fists with regret. He shouldn't have listened to Ciel before. He should have rallied everyone to protest. If it affected his future at the Ministry, so be it. He wasn't the sort to abandon a friend just to keep a tidy resume. But for now, he sighed and resolved to wait for the review board to leave, and then find a way to get Ciel out. The reaction in Slytherin was very different. Already sulky after the Quidditch match, the Slytherin common room erupted in cheers when they heard that the review board had forced Dumbledore to back down and sentenced Ciel to 3 weeks' confinement. Draco Malfoy's face was flushed with triumph. Tossing decorum aside, he jumped onto a table and pumped his fists. "I knew it. My father is here. Slytherin's safe. My father's a governor. They used those despicable tactics against Slytherin. They'll pay for it. Dumbledore still has to answer to the Board of Governors." Many of the younger Slytherins who had looked at Draco with surprise after his repeated clashes with Ciel returned to showing him deference. The Malfoy name carried weight. Even Dumbledore had to listen. As Draco kept crowing about how his father would make people pay, Snape's voice came coldly from the doorway. "Mr. Malfoy, I'd intended to call you after you finished bragging," he said. "You've been at it for 3 minutes. Get down from the table. Your father is waiting in my office." Draco leapt down and scrambled out, still grinning. "Father will bring me good news. I'll restore Slytherin's glory." Snape watched him go with a curl of his lip. Restore Slytherin's glory, he thought. Lucius Malfoy cared less for vague notions of honor than for practical gains. He'd bowed and fawned when necessary to save his family's position. Draco had lived a sheltered life. Perhaps it was time he learned hard lessons. Standing at the office door, Snape didn't enter, merely calling in, You two talk. Lucius, who sat inside, voiced his annoyance. Thanks to you, I've had to deal with those idiotic review board members. Don't drag me into this again, Severus. Don't cause me this trouble either, Lucius, Snape returned dryly. Otherwise, our friendship won't stop me from giving you a nasty jinx. Lucius gave a strained laugh. Draco, however, took the dean's tone as proof of a deep bond between his father and the staff and felt honored. He bounded in, eager. Father, why did you call me? Lucius's expression hardened. He spoke slowly. Do you know what other sanctions Ciel Sprout received besides the 3 weeks of confinement? He has to patrol the Forbidden Forest for 1 night at the end of term, Draco answered, eyes lighting up. I knew you wouldn't let him off easily, Father. He might get eaten out there. Lucius interrupted. At the end of term, you need to find a reason, something that gets you both expelled for a night, or otherwise sent in together. In short, you will go into the Forbidden Forest with him. Draco froze. What? Why would I go into the Forbidden Forest with him? No way. Because this will leave a lasting impression, Lucius said. Giving him a spell patched him up, but it won't erase the bad feeling. If you go in with him and face real danger together, that changes things. After 1 night, what happened before can start to be put aside. He could become an ally, useful to the Malfoys later on. Draco recoiled. Friend? An ally? I won't. He's knocked out my tooth, used Devil's Snare on me. Why should I make friends with him? Draco's pleading look, which usually bent his father to his will, failed this time. Lucius stroked his son's head with a guilty sigh. He is worth it, Draco. In this world, there are no eternal friends or enemies, only interests. Ciel Sprout has potential value. He could bring great returns and help our family out of trouble. Lucius's voice grew darker. He touched Draco's hand. I know how you feel. I bowed my head more times than you can imagine. I groveled where you did not see. Because of that, you can walk with your head high and speak of Malfoy honor. You must learn now. I don't know how much longer I can shield you. A memory of a letter at Malfoy Manor flickered through Lucius's mind. The faint throb of a dark mark brought him a chill. Draco noticed lines on his father's face he'd never seen before and felt a pain in his chest. I'll learn, Father. What about Harry Potter? Draco asked hesitantly. Should I try to befriend him too? Lucius smiled briefly but shook his head. No. Keep your distance. Being a friend of Potter brings danger. Being his enemy, in a small way, is safer. After a few questions about school life, Lucius let Draco go. Before he left, Lucius warned him gravely, do not go out at night, not for any reason. There may be terrible things in the castle. I do not want you to run into them, not even a 1 in 10,000 chance. Draco shivered. The tone in his father's voice carried a fear he hadn't felt before. In the Forbidden Forest, a sharp scream sliced through the trees. Silver blood dotted the snow, brighter than the drifts. A sleek silver-white form lay motionless, the body of a unicorn. From the shadows, a figure in a black hooded cloak darted out. Like some famished thing that had found a feast, he leapt, bypassed the wand, and tore open the unicorn's flank with his mouth. He drank the cursed blood and let the life and power of the unicorn pour into his weakened body. Quirrell made a sound of satisfaction as a voice, Voldemort's, echoed in his head. Quirrell, the voice murmured, killing a unicorn is not something everyone can do. Quirrell smiled, joy shining through the terror. To serve my master, I must give my all. He continued eagerly, planning aloud. Master, I'll write to Lucius Malfoy. Get him to cause a review meeting. Tie Dumbledore up, perhaps get other professors distracted. Tonight I'll steal the Philosopher's Stone while the unicorn blood's power is still strong. Voldemort asked in a low voice, Are you confident? Very, Quirrell answered. I've already tricked Hagrid into telling me how to get past the most troublesome guardian, the 3-headed dog. The rest, Devil's Snare, the flying keys, the goblin puzzle, the wizard's chess, the logic, are child's play. It won't take me 5 minutes to clear them. Voldemort's voice brimmed with anticipation. Then act, Quirrell. If you succeed, you will have everything. When necessary, I will help. Quirrell's face shone with longing, imagining himself at the top of the wizarding world. He sneered at the obstacles that stood between him and the stone. After the dog is Devil's Snare. What can it do to stop me? Tonight, I will change this world. Night fell. Under the surface, Hogwarts hummed with undercurrents. Some members of the Board of Governors smelled opportunity in the academic review. Others wanted only to protect themselves and offend no one. In the Gryffindor common room, ever since learning about the Philosopher's Stone, Harry and Hermione lay awake, unable to sleep. In Slytherin, Draco stared at the ceiling, his father's words, interests bowing, repeating in his head. All of that was irrelevant to Ciel, working late in the greenhouse. His eyes lit up with a new excitement. After a full day studying Serpensortia, he finally understood why Dumbledore had said the spell would help his transfiguration. Professor McGonagall's explanation had clarified the theory. Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration, changes of magical form, and Ptolemy transformation, changes of magical nature, are the two broad categories. But theory alone wouldn't solve practical problems. Like real-world subjects, transfiguration had branches for specific tasks. Serpensortia belonged to conjuration, pulling a snake from thin air. Mastering it meant he could conjure other things, shields, swords, ropes. Ideas and details flashed through Giar's mind. He raised his wand in a practiced motion, from low to high, and thrust it forward. Serpensortia, Chapter 138, Vastness, Breakthrough, Intensity. As the incantation left his lips, a black shadow burst from the tip of Char's wand. A venomous snake, over 3 meters long, hissed and flicked its tongue as it hit the ground. It rose in a threatening posture. On the system panel, the word Serpensortia finished forming. Unlike when he first learned the charm and it had only shown a dim black iron sheen, Serpensortia now flickered with specks of bronze-level light, clear evidence it had reached the critical point of bronze level. Char felt a thrill of satisfaction. The improvement in transfiguration clearly multiplied his learning speed for charms. Even with only black iron transfiguration, the effect is huge, he thought. When my transfiguration rises further, I might even start at platinum grade for any new charm. He swallowed his excitement and refocused. With another motion of his wand, the black snake dissolved into smoke. Char watched every detail intently, not wanting to miss anything. When the last wisp of smoke vanished, wonder and a touch of shock lit his eyes. Amazing, he breathed. Too amazing. This charm contains a complete transfiguration sequence, conjuring from nothing into smoke, forming a snake, then returning from snake to smoke and back to nothing. The key is that I don't need to understand the underlying logic. If I recite the incantation and perform the wand work step by step, it completes itself. It's like running a program. Double-click and it executes. Simple on the surface, but the technique behind it is profound. The wizard who devised this must have had master-level transfiguration. Char drew a deep breath, excitement glittering in his face. His transfiguration was still black iron grade, but the bronze glow already covered most of it. He had a hunch. If he could grasp the core of Serpensortia even a little, promoting his transfiguration to bronze would be easy. He began the charm again. Smoke billowed, and the hiss of snakes followed. Char concentrated, tracking the magical shifts. Chaotic magic rearranged into smoke, condensed into a black serpent, then dispersed again, subtle transformations he could not fully parse. He felt utterly astonished and could only mutter, "Incredible." After some time, he forced himself calmer. Understanding everything at once was unrealistic. He would learn it piece by piece. "I'll start with the smallest detail," he told himself. "How does a single scale on the snake come into being? I'll chew on that slowly." The hissing and the puffing of smoke echoed through the little greenhouse as Char repeated the spell. Meanwhile, at the end of the 4th-floor corridor in Hogwarts, a hooded figure stepped through the trapdoor without hesitation. Inside the room, Cerberus loomed, filling the chamber almost to the ceiling. A hot, foul breath washed over the intruder as the three-headed beast growled low. Quirrell stared, palms sweating. The creature's hide was incredibly tough, its strength immense, able to rip a troll apart. Ordinary charms glanced off it. Its resistance to dark arts was terrifying. Even the killing curse had little effect. A dragon would have been easier to deal with than Cerberus. Quirrell had lost too many times before Cerberus. He hoped Hagrid's method would finally work. As the beast lunged, he conjured a violin. The bow moved as if guided by an invisible hand, and an elegant melody filled the room. Cerberus slowed, grew drowsy, and in less than a moment collapsed, snoring. Quirrell's heart pounded, but he kept the violin playing and hurried through the door behind the creature. The Philosopher's Stone was within reach. He had only one thought. Without Cerberus, what could the remaining checkpoints do to stop him? Devil's Snare? 1 minute. 1 minute was all he needed. He stepped into the dimness. Shadows writhed and coiled. Quirrell smirked. Mere Devil's Snare. Get out of my way. Flames flared from his wand, consuming the twisting tendrils. But what happened next was not what he expected. The Devil's Snare, normally terrified of fire, showed no sign of recoil. If anything, it grew angrier. Thick tendrils sprang toward him. Quirrell's face drained. He threw up a protective charm. It barely bought him time. He caught a strange smell on the air. Lava grass sap, he thought. Who smeared that on the Devil's Snare? Fury flared. Why hadn't he been warned? The sap compensated for Devil's Snare's weakness to fire, but that wasn't all. When the tendrils struck his ward, a force erupted that made his protective charm wobble. Through the ward, he finally saw it. These tendrils had a metallic sheen, as if forged from steel. They were thicker and far more aggressive than any Devil's Snare he'd known. This isn't ordinary Devil's Snare, he snarled internally. Mutated subspecies, bred to be more aggressive. Rage boiled in him. The information he'd received before had not described this at all. The checkpoints he'd been told would be simple were now radically different. If every stage was like this, his plan for the stone was ruined. Tendrils surged again, coiling and strangling as Devil's Snare does best. Quirrell's already weak ward shattered. He barely cast another one in time. Without it, the plant would have crushed him to dust. The new charm collapsed almost immediately. He called out inwardly, "Master!" Magic flowed into his wand, Voldemort's power, and a wall of black flame halted the vines. Seizing the chance, Quirrell fled down the corridor, the cold night wind unable to cool the burning anger within him. He had gone through so much, finding a unicorn, drinking its blood to recover a little strength, and now it felt wasted. Panting, he tried to reason. No, there were gains. I learned Dumbledore's treachery. None of those checkpoints were simple. Still, he had to find the weakness of this mutated Devil's Snare. But the strength he'd gained from the unicorn diminished with each use. The first drinks were the most potent. He could afford few more mistakes. He needed to prepare thoroughly for the next attempt and make sure he succeeded. Shaking his head to clear his thoughts, Quirrell headed for the Forbidden Forest to regroup. Back in the little greenhouse, Char was exhausted. His temples throbbed. He had cast Serpensortia over 100 times, and his mastery had reached bronze level, but his study of the spell's principles had made little progress. Focusing on microscopic magical changes left his vision hazy, like a blur of smoke. He finally exhaled. This is too complex. I can't understand it all at once. I'll take it bit by bit. He turned his attention to the plants. Tending them would help clear his head. When he approached the Devil's Snare, a pleased smile crossed his face. The first batch he had planted had new branches sprouting where he had severed them with Sectum Sempra. New branches, he said. That means second-level nodes have appeared. I can process them further. He examined the new shoots. They were covered in a dark metallic sheen, like flexible steel, an odd sensation. Char's eyes brightened. Every time Devil's Snare grows new branches, they're tougher than before, especially the mutated ones induced by Sectum Sempra. The branches that regrew after cutting through Sectum Sempra are practically steel compared to the original roots. That means practicing Sectum Sempra on them will be far more effective. He glanced at the system panel. His platinum-grade Sectum Sempra glowed, his strongest magical trump card, but progress had slowed since he reached platinum over the holidays. He still had more than half the progress to make before reaching the gold node. 3 weeks of confinement might not be enough, but if he used the newly grown tougher roots to hone Sectum Sempra, he might not just reach gold before confinement ended. He could truly push Sectum Sempra into gold grade. The thought made him eager, and a long-held anxiety eased. His appearance had already nudged fate off its familiar track. The trio still suspected Snape and Dumbledore still schemed, but extra events had appeared, ministry hearings and academic review. If things kept changing, the plot he knew could shift completely within 2 or 3 years. He didn't know what trouble would follow. Worrying was useless. He needed to train and grow stronger. Then he could handle what came. He smiled and focused. Sectum Sempra, he chanted, again and again. This time, Sectum Sempra didn't slice through the new branches like butter. It struck what felt like tough steel, leaving only shallow, quickly healed wounds. When he had earlier used it on Bogey, the devil's snare that hadn't regrown was already much stronger than ordinary plants. He'd thought that was the limit of the mutation. Now he realized that was only the beginning. These new shoots were on a different level. Sectum Sempra could barely nick them. That meant the second and third level nodes would be much harder. Char frowned, but then looked back at the system panel. The platinum glow on Sectum Sempra had intensified more than he expected. His heart leapt. At this rate, gold grade won't be far away. He worked tirelessly, sending one Sectum Sempra after another at the roots. The platinum glow grew stronger and stronger. Dawn came without him noticing. Quirrell returned to the castle from the Forbidden Forest, pale and sullen. He had found no unicorn and still had no clear way to exploit the devil's snare's weakness. Walking through the corridors, he overheard a group of younger students talking about the review panel the previous day. Did you hear? One of the herbology masters was knocked out in Char's little greenhouse yesterday. They say Char grew some mutated devil's snare. Sounds powerful just from the name. Professor Snape said Char's talent in herbology is incredible. Quirrell froze. Good, finally a lead. He had assumed Professor Sprout had cultivated the mutated devil's snare. He hadn't expected it to be this Char's doing. Sprout would be difficult to interrogate. She wasn't Hagrid. But a child like Char? How clever could he be? Getting the devil's snare's weakness out of him would be much easier. Best of all, Char was in confinement by Dumbledore, 3 whole weeks stuck inside. Everyone knew how unbearable that was for a young wizard. Quirrell smiled. During the time Voldemort had latched onto him, his dark arts had grown, and more importantly, his skill with legilimency and mental manipulation had deepened. He felt he could break Char. No need to rush, he thought. Wait until his dissatisfaction peaks. That's when he'll be easiest to manipulate. Time flew. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Chapter 139, Legilimency, Guardian Tree, Senior Sister Quirrell? Inside the little greenhouse, Chard breathed out lightly. 3 days already? Time really flew. Stuck here, he hardly felt it passing. For most people, 3 weeks of detention would be unbearable, but for him it was a treasure, time to practice and tend his plants without interruption. I can train and cultivate with nothing distracting me, he muttered to himself. This is perfect. His eyes drifted to the system panel. The silver glow on the Sectum Sempra tag had deepened, more than twice as bright as before. If he kept at it another day or two, a hint of gold might appear. Promotion to gold level was within reach. A week or two of steady work, and it would be done. That alone made the detention worthwhile. Oolong Chudong had changed noticeably too. In 3 days, he'd repeated the spell hundreds, thousands of times. He still felt like someone trying to see the moon reflected in water when it came to the spell's underlying mechanics, but he could see a little more clearly than before. His physical execution had become progressively more shulen, more practiced. The spell's mastery now shimmered with a bright silver within its thick bronze-level luster. It was close to silver level. Chard flicked his wand. Smoke poured out, and a black serpent over 4 meters long uncoiled from the cave. It slid forward with greater speed and precision. Its fangs glistened with poison. The snake's flexibility, its combat awareness, even its size had improved. Chard nodded, pleased, eyes bright with expectation. If this continued, Oolong Chudong had significant potential. With extremely high mastery, who knew? Maybe one day he could summon a 1,000-year basilisk, Nidhogger itself, or even the world serpent. For now, that was fantasy. He shook his head, smiling, and returned to practice. He was about to resume when the greenhouse's protective enchantment opened a small slot to deliver food, water, and the potions he needed for his plants. After 3 days, Chard was used to it. He could go without food for a while, but Professor Sprout still had Hufflepuff's little kitchen send him the most nourishing meals every day. She fussed over him, worried he might suffer malnutrition. Chard rolled his eyes, but appreciated the food. It broke up the monotony, let him clear his head, and helped him focus. He accepted the tray, but something else lay beneath it, a scrap of parchment. Surprise flickered across his face. Dumbledore's protective magic filtered and screened almost everything that tried to pass through the barrier. Only food, water, and planting supplies were supposed to get in. What was this parchment? Words began to appear on the paper as he stared. Do you want freedom? Do you want to escape detention? Don't you think this is unfair? Why are you being treated this way? Chard, I can help you. I can make sure this never happens again. I can give you the power to enforce fairness and justice. Chard's pupils tightened. Outside the little greenhouse, Quirrell turned slowly and left, a strange smile on his face. Dumbledore's protections were powerful, but because they allowed in food and supplies, they had a complicated filtering mechanism. Complexity meant loopholes. Quirrell, once a rare genius at Hogwarts and now influenced by Voldemort, had found one after 3 days' study. He had confounded a talking parchment and slipped it in as if it were food. Quirrell's gambit relied on Chard reacting, on his curiosity or resentment breaking through. If Chard began writing or conversing with the parchment, Quirrell planned to probe him with the minimal legilimency he had, gleaning secrets about the mutated devil's snare subspecies from his replies. Then it would be harvest time. Chard's face went dark when he read the words. He'd been enjoying himself here, eating and drinking, training, planting, so why was this filth being sent in? He didn't need to think long to know who had done it. Quirrell. Could the man never stop? He moved immediately to the plot where the guardian tree sapling grew and pressed his hand against it. Warmth and a cascade of protective blessings flowed into him, strong counter-magic against the dark arts. Only then did he relax enough to tear the parchment to pieces. He scattered and buried the fragments near the sapling, reasoning that the guardian tree, which countered dark arts, would neutralize any lingering malice. It was the two-faced man's doing. There was no such thing as being too careful. Quirrell, waiting back in his room, expected a reply. Minute after minute passed, but the parchment in his hand stayed silent. He raised an eyebrow. "This kid didn't respond?" he muttered. "Too cautious, perhaps. Students of that house tend to be timid. He needs more motivation." So he wrote again, lines upon lines of bait. On the fragments in the greenhouse ink flowed, faint, seductive magic pulling at the edges of the wards. It was annihilated at once by the guardian tree's sacred magic. Half an hour later, Quirrell's wrist ached. He scowled. "Damn kid, why so defensive? I wrote so much, no reaction. Does he lack manners?" He worried the parchment had been discarded, then forced himself to calm down. It's only been 3 days. His anger or resentment may not have peaked yet. He resolved to keep sending parchment with every meal until Chard took the bait. The next morning, another parchment arrived. The words that bloomed across it were kinder, coaxing. "Chard, you don't need to be afraid. This is Hogwarts, the safest place in the magical world. I just want to help you. Fairness and justice are pursuits everyone holds dear." Chard didn't even look at it. He tore it up and buried the pieces beneath the guardian tree. Half an hour later, Quirrell, teeth clenched, wrote again and again on his parchment. "Hello? Is anyone there? Chard?" Still no reply. Anger made his expression ugly. "I wrote so much. At least acknowledge me. Silent treatment?" He wanted to grab a quill and scold the boy in person, but restrained himself. "Persevere, Quirrell," he reminded himself. "Send one every meal." So for the next 3 days he did. Almost every meal, a parchment was slipped in. Gradually, Quirrell felt his efforts must pay off. A week after Chard's detention began, another tray arrived with another parchment. Chard felt like he was looking at a persistent nuisance. Why was this man wasting time with harassment instead of stealing the Philosopher's Stone? He tore the paper into pieces and walked toward the sapling to bury them. Then he stopped. The guardian tree had grown. In a few days, the sapling had visibly lengthened by a segment. More strikingly, the edges of its leaves shimmered with a faint, hazy silver. Chard's heart tightened. Had the parchments been toxic? Had they damaged the tree? He checked the sapling's information. A new line had quietly appeared in its reward description, extremely weak occlumency blessing. It was faint, so weak it wasn't even bronze rated, but there nonetheless. Occlumency? That was a property the guardian tree had never shown before. He put the pieces together. The parchments had carried legilimency magic. In neutralizing that magic, the guardian tree had gradually developed properties that adapted to it, producing an occlumency blessing, however faint, capable of resisting legilimency. That made sense. Once he realized it, the annoyance at Quirrell evaporated. Occlumency was a boon. In the wizarding world, using legilimency on someone was a serious offense, but some skilled legilimens could capture others' thoughts almost passively. Voldemort's talent for legilimency was innate. Even disembodied, he could probe minds. Chard had always kept his guard up around Quirrell, afraid that even a passing glance might carry Voldemort's probing. If he muttered in his sleep, what if he exposed things? His system was his lifeline. He could not risk discovery. But now, with occlumency developing in the Guardian Tree, those worries could be alleviated. A spark of eagerness lit his eyes. He looked at the parchment he had once despised with new respect. After a pause, he called Shadow. The shadow darted and wrapped around his quill, awkwardly scrawling a single line on the parchment. "Who are you?" Back in his room, Quirrell sat up so abruptly he knocked his inkpot. Excitement flooded him. He replied, "I knew it." He preened inwardly. "I'm a genius." He hesitated, then hit on a tactic, to coax a naive boy, pose as a woman. It worked more easily. A few moments later he wrote, a little coquettish, "Hello, I am your senior sister, a very beautiful one. As for how beautiful, hey, guess? Chapter 140, First Battle Against Lord Voldemort? Still need practice." Charles stared at the words that kept appearing on the parchment. He had long since distrusted Quirrell's character and integrity, but seeing those messages still left him a little baffled. So Quirrell was playing the senior sister now? And I wonder? Charles' cheek twitched. A question nagged at him. Hadn't Quirrell already learned how to get past Cerberus? Why was he still pestering him? What else did he want? How should Charles handle Quirrell? Just then, Shadowthorns took control of the quill with its shadows and began replying to Quirrell in quick, neat strokes. "Really? Which senior are you? How pretty are you?" On the other side of the parchment, Quirrell's face lit up. Pretending to be a pretty senior was an excellent way to win this brat's trust and stir his curiosity. Heh, a first-year wizard, the kind who still believed small tricks. With a little coaxing, he should be able to wring the weakness of this mutated devil's snare out of Charles. Quirrell grabbed the quill again and penned line after line. "Heh, if I tell you my name outright, I'd be shy. Oh, by the way, you haven't told me yet. What type do you like?" Shadowthorns considered for a beat, then wrote, "The spiky kind. The more thorns, the better. The harder, the better." Quirrell froze. Ah, were young wizards really this strange now? Or was he becoming old and out of touch? He gritted his teeth and forced a laugh. "Your tastes are unique, as expected of you. You know, coincidentally, I like thorns too. My roommates call me, Queen of Thorns." Charles watched the exchange and felt a surge of surprise. Shadowthorns and Quirrell were actually chatting. A moment later, relief followed. He didn't want to interact too much with a Quirrell who was pretending to be a pretty senior. Even ignoring the possibility of legilimency emanating from the parchment, the idea of Quirrell being cute through a sheet of paper gave him the creeps. Letting Shadowthorns handle the conversation was a good idea. Legilimency targeted humans. He'd never heard of it affecting plants. Shadowthorns wouldn't be affected, and it would keep busy so Charles could continue his practice. He told Shadowthorns not to say anything it shouldn't, handed the parchment back, and returned to his exercises. He glanced once more at the parchment. Quirrell's stream of lines hadn't stopped. A wry smile flickered across Charles' mouth before it hardened again. Quirrell's little seduction game was clumsy now, but if it weren't for Dumbledore's protective magic over the little greenhouse, Quirrell wouldn't have limited himself to this. When Charles' detention ended, Quirrell would keep looking for ways to get at him. Quirrell had clearly gone desperate. He'd be hunting unicorns in the Forbidden Forest, drinking their blood, ignoring the curse, anything to get the Philosopher's Stone. The more desperate he was, the more dangerous. Charles didn't want to slip up because he'd been careless. Before the detention ends, Sectum Sempra has to reach gold level, he told himself. And Transfiguration and Oolong Chudong need to be rushed too. Charles cleared his mind of distractions and practiced with renewed focus. The little greenhouse hummed with magic, the sharp, slicing edges of Sectum Sempra cutting through the air. Smoke flared, the hiss of snakes echoed. Time flew. 3 more days passed. Sectum Sempra! Sectum Sempra! Charles' wand moved like a blade. A Sectum Sempra strike, cleaner and keener than before, swept across a new branch of the Devil's Snare. This time the cut ran much deeper. he felt within his mind a subtler magic node along the branch being split open. It was like their previous encounters. The Sectum Sempra magic sealed the incision, and for the devil's snare to push out new shoots, it would have to break through that sealing layer. Perhaps this new branch had already developed a secondary magic node and pierced the Sectum Sempra barrier. It wasn't as difficult as at the beginning. Charles only needed to add a few drops of potion before the snare's magic threaded through the Sectum Sempra. Above the devil's snare, the reward orb pulsed and grew another ring. Charles couldn't hide his satisfaction. He'd taken another step toward the devil's snare's maturity. Still, he didn't rush to tackle more secondary nodes. Experience had taught him the limits. With the current strength of Sectum Sempra, success on secondary nodes is still spotty, he muttered. If the epidermis is cut too slowly, the whole node can fail, and that ruins the quality of the snare when it matures. He watched the system panel. The silver glow around the word Sectum Sempra had flecks of gold now. The first shimmer of a promotion node had appeared yesterday. That meant his mastery was inching toward gold level. The power had increased. He was pleased. In a little over a week, even if it hadn't fully promoted to gold, he'd feel confident tackling secondary nodes. But when his gaze moved to Oolong Chudong, his brow tightened. After several days of practice, he'd become more proficient. His competence was catching up to Sectum Sempra, almost touching gold level. But Charles wasn't chasing raw power. He wanted the deep truths of transfiguration embedded in its foundations. There, he'd made no real progress. The core of Oolong Chudong remained elusive, like moonlight on water, like a flower in a mirror. No matter how he approached it, he couldn't grasp the essence. He dwelt on the research direction. Maybe he'd picked the wrong approach. No matter how patient or persistent he was, being on the wrong track meant wasted effort. Like students who study all night but never improve because they study the wrong things. He concentrated on a single change at a time, from point to surface to whole, but the breakthrough wouldn't come. The transfiguration entry on the panel still sat at the bronze level promotion node. 10 days of detention remained. After that, the undisturbed environment would vanish and his improvement would slow. Worse, Quirrell would be waiting. With or without bronze-level transfiguration, the gap in magical capability would be significant. If he didn't break through now, Charles would be uneasy. As he brooded, a sound reached him, the scratch of quills on parchment. He turned. Shadow Thorns had extended a dozen shadowy tendrils, each wrapped around a quill, and was hammering out messages at a frantic pace. "Senior sister? Are you there? Are you awake? Wake up and chat with me. Didn't you say chatting with me was fun? Didn't you say you weren't tired at all? Reply quickly." Charles checked the time, 3:30 in the morning. Of course, Shadow Thorns didn't need to sleep. Quirrell had probably been chatting with it for what felt like days. The Guardian Tree's reward information confirmed it. The faint, barely formed occlumency blessing had become clearer, now showing a tinge of bronze-level sheen. It was about to upgrade. That was how many messages Quirrell had written these past days. Charles felt a twinge of sympathy. Quirrell had been a star at Hogwarts once, brilliant, probably the equal of the brightest like Hermione. He'd even taken on the Defense Against the Dark Arts chair. If his life had gone on normally, his future would have been unlimited. Instead, under Lord Voldemort, he spent his days pretending to be a senior sister and chatting with a clump of shadowy vine. How tragic. He was about to turn back to his studies when a thought occurred to him. Quirrell, even in the original timeline, had been a genius. His transfiguration skills had been extraordinary. Since Oolong Chudong seemed related to Lord Voldemort, perhaps asking Quirrell might help. Charles suppressed a grin at the thought of scaring Quirrell off, then shook his head. If Quirrell left, who would he ask? So he had Shadow Thorns write a deliberately theatrical series of messages. "Senior sister, are you awake? Was I too enthusiastic and scared you off, senior sister? I'm sorry, senior sister. I've drifted since childhood, raised in the Muggle world, endured neglect. No girl has ever appreciated me like you, senior sister. Senior sister, please come back." Cut to Quirrell, collapsed on his bed in his room. He looked haggard. What had begun as playfulness had become numbness. He never expected Charles could talk so much. No rest, no pause. On the first day, Charles had made him pretend to be a blade of grass. When Quirrell tried to sleep, Charles insisted, "Grass doesn't get tired. Grass doesn't need to sleep. If you sleep, you're not grass, and I won't chat with you." Quirrell had spent nights arguing about what soil tasted best and which fertilizer worked. One day of that was one thing. Now they'd been at it for 3 days. He felt like his brain would split. He'd given up. He sensed the parchment still filling with words, but he didn't care. He wanted to sleep. At that moment, a cold voice slid into his mind. "Quirrell, how are things progressing? 10 days have passed. Have you extracted any information from that kid?" Quirrell froze. "Master? Not yet." A cold, alien fury flared through his thoughts. Voldemort's voice turned thin and venomous. "No? You mean, after so many days you still haven't made progress? A naive child in such conditions, and you can't make him speak? Are you stalling my acquisition of the Philosopher's Stone, Quirrell?" Quirrell felt his heart stop. No, Master. I want your resurgence more than anyone. Please let me explain. The lack of progress is for a reason." Voldemort cut him off. "You'd better give me a convincing reason." Quirrell stammered and explained how he'd used the parchment to chat with Charles, playing a senior sister to lure him in. He showed a thick bundle of chat logs as proof. Voldemort scanned them. Disbelief prickled his scalp. What had Hogwarts turned into? Was this how they played? Then the voice softened, almost indulgent. "Quirrell, this must have been hard on you." A note of excitement crept in. "But success is close. Look at the latest message from that kid. He's taken the bait. Quirrell, reply quickly." Quirrell hesitated, hand shaking over the quill. Voldemort snapped, "Idiot! Forget it. Let me." Quirrell's hand seemed to move by itself. The quill wrote in an elegant, practiced script. "Dear Charles, hearing you say that makes me so happy. Although we are separated by parchment, I feel our hearts are close. Can you hear Senior Sister's heartbeat? Perhaps it's time we share some secrets with each other? I hope you won't mind. In exchange, Senior Sister can tell you Senior Sister's name first. My name is..." After a pause, the quill scrawled a name, Delphi. The instant that name appeared, the guardian tree sapling in the little greenhouse rustled violently. Its silvery leaf edges brightened and blurred as if a breeze of magic passed through them. The reaction was far stronger than before. The barely formed occlumency blessing burst into a full bronze-level glow and became occlumency blessing, bronze level. Charles' expression turned grave. That reaction meant the legilimency emanating from the parchment had suddenly strengthened. Quirrell's own legilimency could not have leapt so far overnight. The only possibility was obvious. Someone else had logged into the account. "Lord Voldemort took the account," Charles muttered, not surprised so much as oddly amused. He never expected his first real brush with Lord Voldemort to happen while the Dark Lord was posing as an online romantic. But looking at the flowery handwriting on the parchment, at the efforts to play seductress, Charles felt something like pity and then amusement. In terms of raw magical skill, he couldn't begin to match Voldemort. But in the art of online flirting with a science and engineering type who'd barely seen a real girl, Lord Voldemort still had a lot to learn. Lord Voldemort? He still needed practice.